70% success rate in supporting homeless young people into employment. How will the Youth Guarantee help government join up with, enhance and champion local programmes like this?
That sounds like a fantastic programme by the YMCA in her constituency. And it is precisely this that we need to join up with what local colleges are doing, support provided by local councils, supported employment programmes run by the NHS, because if we join that up, base it on local needs, her young constituent and many others like her will get the chance they need and deserve to build a better life.
Jack Rankin.
Question number 13, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We want to reform the system to do a much better job in helping people to enter and stay in work. We'll be publishing a green paper next spring and we'll be discussing our proposals with disabled people.
Jack Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To protect those in need and to deliver for taxpayers, you need to take tough decisions. Reforming health and disability benefits will require the ministers to make difficult choices. But so far, the plans rely on reducing NHS waiting lists, which the OBR has said will hardly have any effect on economic activity. Are you willing to make unpopular decisions to solve this issue? And if so, when?
Minister.
What I can assure the honourable gentleman is we will make the right decisions and they will be set out in our green paper in the spring. There is a need to reform the health and disability benefit system, there's no question about that, and we want to talk to disabled people themselves about the details in order we can make sure we get it right.
Liam Connell.
14, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Disabled people and people with long-term health conditions deserve the same rights as everybody else, including the right to work. Many of the 2.8 million people out of work due to long-term sickness say they want to work if they can get the right help and support. And that's what our Get Britain Working plan will deliver.
A core objective of the Get Britain Working White Paper is to support disabled people into employment. As the Minister will know, the Blue Badge scheme is an important provision in enabling people to get to work. But data released this month shows a sharp rise in Blue Badge theft, with badges being sold on by criminals for upwards of £500 to people who use them to avoid parking charges. Will the Minister back my campaign to tackle this injustice?
Secretary of State.
Yes. I think it is disgusting that some people think it's all right to steal the blue badges that so many disabled people rely on to work, but also socialise and see family and friends. I know my honourable friend, the Minister for the Future of Roads, who's responsible for this issue, is a strong supporter of his campaign, and I will contact her to stress my support and the support of my entire department too.
The Get Britain Working White Paper rightly says that people deserve the opportunity to thrive and that sports, arts and culture are crucial to achieving this goal, especially for those with disabilities. The Sovereign Centre in Eastbourne, where I learnt to swim, provides vital sports and leisure opportunities which will help serve the same, with the future of 2 of our pools there being considered. To best honour the aims of this white paper, does the Minister agree with me that Eastbourne Borough Council should engage with all interested providers who may be able to protect our fun and training pools at the Sovereign Centre before making any final decisions on the Centre's next steps?
Really relevant question, as well as it should on Secretary of State. Do you want to answer? It's up to you. I'm not quite sure it was relevant to the question.
Well, I really do believe sport and art and culture can play a huge role in engaging and inspiring people, helping them on the pathway to skills, confidence, jobs, and I want to see that provision enhanced in future, because we're determined to have that at a national partnership level. I think it needs to happen locally too, to get people working and earning again.
Conor Nesbitt.
Question number 15, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our plan to get Britain working is crucial to tackling low pay and increasing living standards in every corner of the country. When only 1 in 6 people ever fully escape low pay, this party believes that's not good enough. So our new Jobs and Careers Service, backed by £55 million of additional funding next year, will kickstart our reforms to help more people get work and get on in their work so they boost their living standards too.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Average wages in my constituency of Crewe and Nantwich, a place with a proud industrial heritage, lag behind the regional and national averages at just £686 per week before tax. So can the Secretary of State outline how the Get Britain Working white paper will support growth as well as the high-skilled, well-paid jobs in my constituency, not just the biggest cities?
Secretary of State.
This government shares my honourable friend's determination to boost the living standards of his constituents. So the Get Britain Working White Paper will ensure every local area, including in his constituency, produces its own Get Britain Working Plan. Alongside our industrial strategy, our plan to make work pay, the National Wealth Fund and Skills England, this will help people get work, progress in their careers with good opportunities for employment right across the country.
Richard Holden.
Question number 16, please, Mr Speaker.
Under the last Conservative government, an estimated 880,000 of the poorest pensioners eligible for pension credit were not claiming it. We have launched the biggest ever pension credit awareness campaign and also written to 120,000 pensioners on housing benefit, urging them to apply. As a result, claims for pension credit have more than doubled, and those who receive pension credit will also receive winter fuel payments and other related benefits.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. Before the last general election, the party opposite suggested that the removal of the winter fuel payment would mean 4,000 pensioners extra a year would die of freezing in poverty. How many will die under the government's proposals from this year?
Mr Speaker, this government remains absolutely committed to supporting low-income pensioners. We're supporting them through the Household Support Fund, which local authorities can use to help people on the lowest incomes with their bills. The Minister for Energy and Consumers has also raised £500 million from energy suppliers to help those most vulnerable consumers in debt. And we've also got the Warm Homes Discount and the Warm Homes Plan to help those on low incomes to heat their homes.
Ewan Steinback.
Mr Speaker, under the Conservatives, billions in pension credit went unclaimed. The burden for driving up claims often lies in fantastic organisations such as Christians Against Poverty, the Falkirk and Clark's Carers Centre and Citizens Advice Falkirk and Denny, as well as the brilliant Falkirk Council Welfare Benefits team in my constituency. What assurance can the Minister give me that beyond the 21st of December that her department will work tirelessly to prevent billions in benefits being left unclaimed?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and indeed we have taken forward the biggest awareness campaign for claiming pension credit that has ever been seen, and we are absolutely determined that those on the lowest incomes should claim pension credit and be awarded pension credit, which will passport them to winter fuel payments and other related benefits.
Kirsty Blackman.
The Scottish Government is bringing back the winter fuel payment because we're aware of how much of an awful disaster this has been for the Labour government. People are terrified to switch on their heating. Can she explain to pensioners, please, who are living in poverty circumstances but not eligible for pension credit, what they should do this winter? Should they just wear an extra blanket?
Minister.
The Scottish Government have been given a record settlement in the recent budget, and winter fuel payments and other benefits are devolved, as she knows, to the Scottish Government.
Rachel Maston.
Mr Speaker, I want to thank the residents of York for donating to my thermals collection on Saturday. However, I know that older people are going to really struggle this winter in the city of York. So can she say how many people have signed up across the country to the pension credit since July, and what additional steps will be taken to ensure that those that miss out on the 21st of December deadline will still be able to get support to keep warm this winter?
Minister.
Claims have more than doubled, so they've increased by 145% since late July, and we are working at pace to process those claims. We've deployed an additional 500 staff to make sure that those who are on the lowest incomes get the pension credit that they need.
We come to topicals. Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Mrs. Thank you. Question number 1, please, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, as a lifelong champion of family carers, dealing with the problem of carers' allowance overpayments is a priority for me and my right honourable friend, the Minister for Social Security and Disability. Last week, we set out the next steps in our independent review led by Liz Sayce, the former Chief Executive of Disability Rights UK. This will report by the summer, looking at how and why overpayments were built up, the changes we can make for the future, and how best to help those affected. Along with the biggest ever cash boost to the earnings threshold for carers allowance announced in the budget, this shows our determination to give family carers the support they need and deserve.
Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, over 23,000 people have lost their winter fuel allowance. That's over 90% of former claimants. So does the Minister think that it's fair that someone who has paid tax all of their working life will now be taxed on their state pension as well as losing their winter fuel allowance?
Sarah Stay.
The Honourable Lady talks about the winter fuel payment, and she fails to mention our determination to make sure the 880,000 pensioners who don't claim pension credit but should, so that they can get that winter fuel payment, or the £4.9 million household support fund allocation allocated to West Sussex, which covers her constituency, which can be used for precisely those pensioners just above the pension credit threshold who've worked hard all their lives but need extra support with the cost of heating.
Tom Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the review into the overpayment of carers' allowance, which will come as a huge relief to many people in East Worthing and Shoreham. Can the Secretary of State confirm that the Department will do everything it can to prevent family carers unnecessarily getting into debt in the future?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I can confirm that. We do place a very high value on the contribution of family carers. The budget announcements that my right honourable friend referred to around the carers allowance earnings threshold will help avert inadvertent overpayments in the future and also bring about 60,000 additional carers into eligibility for carers allowance. We are determined to do everything we can.
Shadow Secretary of State Helen Waitley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Secretary of State tell me how many people who should get the winter fuel payment will get it this winter?
We intend to ensure everybody who's entitled to the pension credit and therefore the winter fuel payment claim it and get it. We've seen a 145% increase in claims, far more than was ever achieved under the last government. And if she was so concerned about that, perhaps she should have taken action when she had 14 years in government.
Helen Waitley.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, she simply won't give a straight answer. She won't tell the House what she knows, just like she knew that their choices would push 100,000 pensioners into poverty, and she didn't tell the House that either. So let's try this question instead. The government's own figures show that pensioners applying now are going to have to wait until the spring to find out if they will get winter fuel money. So what's her advice to a pensioner sitting in the cold and wondering if they can afford to turn on their heating this Christmas?
If the Honourable Lady cared so much about pensioners in the cold, why did her government leave 880,000 not claiming pension credit? Why did she first promise to bring together the merger of housing benefit and pension credit in 2011 and never delivered? This government is taking action. 42,500 more people are receiving pension credit now than when she left government. We're determined to act. Perhaps she should apologise for her failure.
Tamanjeet Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Many of my more senior constituents are concerned about their finances and winter fuel payments, especially those just above the threshold. So with 1,688 households in Slough currently eligible for pension credit but not claiming this vital benefit, what steps is my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, taking to increase the uptake and ensure that those who are not eligible are not left out in the cold?
I'd like to place on record my thanks to the 160 local authorities who've worked with the DWP to raise awareness of applying for pension credit, and the various charities around the country who've worked with us too. We have seen a record number of people, a doubling of the number of people claiming pension credit, and we are processing those claims at pace.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Steve Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And a national audit report last week highlighted how cliff edges in the care allowance system has resulted in 136,000 people owing £250 million. In light of that, will the Minister ensure that we stop this injustice, stop the demands, until there is a fairer system introduced?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the NAO report, which I asked for as chair of the Work and Pension Select Committee last May. We are determined, as I've said earlier, to address the problem of carers allowance overpayments. The cliff edge could be dealt with by the introduction of a taper instead of the current arrangements. The Chancellor mentioned that in her budget speech in the autumn. If we do that, it won't happen quickly because it'll be quite a major project, but it is something we're looking at very closely.
Mr. Swallow.
Speaker, my constituent Gary has seen his real terms income fall because the pension he built up before 1997 in a defined benefit scheme is not subject to indexation, even though 80% of defined benefit schemes are in surplus. Will my right honourable friend ask the pensions regulator to look at this issue?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for representing the concerns of his constituent. My department is working closely with the pensions regulator, and we are currently looking to gather information on the number of schemes that provide discretionary increases on pre-1997 benefits and the number who do not. At the moment, those schemes have the discretion as to whether to decide to, the trustees of those schemes, as to whether to decide to index or not index those benefits.
Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Over the weekend, James Reed, Chief Executive of one of the largest recruiters in the UK, said that job figures are down, vacancies are down by 26% compared to the same period last year, and that should be a red light warning that higher unemployment and recession is just around the corner. So will the Secretary of State plead with the Chancellor to reverse the jobs NI tax raid that is devastating employment figures before that red light warning becomes a reality?
Minister.
Thank the honourable gentleman for his question. We still have over 800,000 vacancies in this economy, and businesses are crying out for staff. That's why through our reform programme we are determined that the DWP will serve business better, and I look forward to working with members right across this House to make that happen.
Adam Jogi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, my constituent Andrew Price and Matthew Whitmore came to my surgery to share their anger and distress at their pensions being stolen by a so-called investment company. They are thousands of pounds out of pocket. So can I ask the Pensions Minister what protections are in place, and will she meet with me to discuss how my constituents can get their money back?
Minister.
I would be very happy to meet with him. Unfortunately, there are many of these cases in which people are preyed on by scammers, and I'd be happy to meet with him to discuss the case further.
Sir Desmond Swain.
So why did the OBR estimate that the budget would cost 50,000 jobs?
Minister.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the OBR report that says overall employment will go up.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How does the Secretary of State envision the future of job centres to look like in Scotland and in my constituency of Western Bartonshire, and what role will technology have to play in that?
Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his question? He is absolutely right to highlight that any reform to our job centres must come with digital transformation. We are currently exploring schemes such as a Job Centre in Your Pocket app, as well as looking for ways in which job seekers can self-serve in terms of meeting the conditions of their conditionality regime.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. December the 4th, my colleague, the Honourable Member for Murray West, Nairn and Strathbay, asked the Prime Minister about WASPy women and was told the government were working at pace. Since then, 1,400 or 1,500 more women have died without justice or compensation. Can the Minister tell us what working at pace means and give us a timeline for that, please?
I thank him for that question. I was the first minister for 8 years to meet with the WASPI campaigners to listen to their concerns. The Ombudsman took 6 years to investigate 6 cases. We are working at pace on this issue. We hope to come to the House soon, if you'll listen to my answer, to update him and the public on what we're going to do next.
Richard Quidley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Young people on supported housing, including my constituency of Isle of Wight West, effectively pay a marginal rate of tax of 55% on their universal credit when they start work, meaning earnings of just £133 a week see their housing benefit tapered to nil, meaning work doesn't pay. Would the Minister look at the economic benefits of reducing that taper and increasing the applicable amount, making sure that work does pay and improving housing security?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend raises a very important point. There is a problem in the interaction between the universal credit taper rate and the housing benefit taper for people in supported and temporary accommodation. And we are at the moment looking at options for how to tackle this quite serious work disincentive problem.
Paul Culver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Christmas, over 1 in 4 children in this country will be living in poverty. This can be partly addressed by scrapping the 2-child benefit cap and paid for simply by reversing the Tory tax cut on the banks. So can I ask the Secretary of State, what's more important, hungry children or bankers' bonuses?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He's right to raise the condition of children living in poverty in this country, and that's why, as I mentioned earlier in questions, the Child Poverty Task Force is doing extensive work on this issue.
It's Osmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to 2022 Migration Observatory report, over 200,000 children are likely to be families with no recourse to public funds, NRPF. As the 2022 Work and Pensions Committee report highlighted, these families face particularly tough circumstances without access to benefits. Can the Minister confirm whether the Child Poverty Task Force is engaging directly with affected families to understand the challenges they are facing?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable lady for her question, my honourable friend. The Child Poverty Task Force is considering all children across the UK in all aspects of our child poverty strategy, and we recognise the distinct challenges of poverty faced by children in particular groups such as migrant children, disabled children and others, and we are engaging directly with families affected by poverty. We recognise that the causes of child poverty are deep-rooted and we'll look at all levers to make change.
Adam Maguire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Within Epsom Muir, local charities like the Sunnybank Trust are seeing a lack of employment opportunities for people with learning disabilities. In fact, only 6.9% of people with learning disabilities are currently in paid work. What measures is the DWP taking to support employers to help individuals with learning disabilities to get into work?
Minister.
Well, the honourable member raises a very important point. She'll probably be aware of the Buckland review published before the election, looking specifically at employment support for people with autism. My honourable friend and I met Sir Robert Buckland recently, and we are looking at how we can take forward the ideas that he proposed in his report.
Chair of the Select Committee, Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a recently published FOI report indicates that AI tools used to detect DWP fraud are biased and disproportionately discriminate against people by age, disability, marital status and nationality, and obviously this has caused considerable concern. What assurances can my right honourable friend give that the procurement and use of such tools will be covered by strict governance standards, including tests for fairness?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. She will know that we face a significant challenge with fraud and error costing the Department almost £10 billion a year, and it is right that we look to utilise all available tools to tackle it. However, I understand her concerns, though I would remind her that the final decision on whether someone receives a welfare payment is always made by a human. That is the most robust safeguard that we can have in place, although it sits alongside, of course, a broader suite.
Alfred Brandreth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My inspirational constituent, Bells Lewis, has terminal bowel cancer. When she was first undergoing treatment, she was initially turned down for PIP, despite the significant impact on her ability to work and carry out basic daily activities. Has the Minister considered incorporating clinical diagnosis alongside function in eligibility assessments? And will the Minister meet with Bells to discuss the assessment process?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we do keep the assessment process under review. I'd be very happy to look at the details of this particular case and perhaps meet with her and her constituent if that would be helpful.
Final question, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. An astonishing £35 billion has been lost to benefit fraud and error since the pandemic. So can my right honourable friend outline the plans and the timeline for recouping this money?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the scale of the enormous cost to the department in fraud of upwards of £35 billion since the pandemic. She will be pleased to know that the fraud, error and debt bill is due to come before the House early in the new year. This side of the House is serious about tackling fraud. It's just a shame we inherited the mess we did.
That completes questions. Before I come to the urgent question, I'd like to make a short statement. The House of Commons respects the jurisdiction of the courts, for example, in our sub judice rule. The sub judice rule applies to all criminal cases, including cases involving espionage, which are currently before the courts. It is important that nothing we say should prejudice a fair trial before a jury. The sub judice rule applies to the majority of civil cases. However, the sub judice rule does not apply where a ministerial decision is in question, such as the decision in the case by the Home Secretary to exclude the person known as H6 from the UK on the basis that his exclusion is conducive to public good on grounds of national security. For information, I understand that this afternoon the Administrative Court has decided to lift the anonymity. The Government is responsible to this House, which holds ministers accountable for what is done on their authority. While it's important that members should be able to question ministers, I will remind them that the rules set out in Erskine May, paras 21.20 and 21.23, that it is only in order to criticise the conduct of a member of the royal family when debating a substantive motion drawn up in proper terms, which it is not in this urgent question. So I hope the House has got a feel for how we're going to debate this. I now call Sir Iain Duncan Smith.
Speaker, to ask the Government if they will make a statement on the extent of United Front Work Department operations within the UK.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the first duty of any government is national security, so we welcome the Court's decision to uphold the Home Office's position in regard to the exclusion of H6, who can now be named as Yang Teng-bo. The Special Immigration Appeals Commission concluded that there was a basis for the conclusion that H6 had been in a position to generate relationships with prominent UK figures which could be leveraged for political interference purposes by the Chinese Communist Party, including the United Front Work Department and the Chinese state. Mr. Speaker, where there are individuals who pose a threat to our national security, we are absolutely committed to using the full range of powers available to disrupt them. Where we encounter foreign interference or espionage, whether this stems from the United Front Work Department or any other state-linked actor, we will be swift in using all available tools, including prosecutions, exclusions, sanctions and diplomacy in order to keep our country safe. Now, given the potential for further litigation, it would not be appropriate for me to say any more, but it is important to recognise that this case does not exist in a vacuum. As the Director General of MI5 made clear in October, we are in the most complex threat environment he has ever seen. Alongside the threat from terrorism, we face ongoing efforts by a number of states, including China, Russia and Iran, to harm the UK's security. Our response is amongst the most robust and sophisticated anywhere in the world. Now, the National Security Act of 2023, which was supported by members on all sides of the House and which strengthened our powers to protect the UK, is central to our protection against those states who seek to conduct hostile acts. To date, there have been 6 individuals charged under this new Act, and the Government has been working hard on the rollout of a crucial part of the National Security Act, the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, or FIRS. We will say more about this soon, but we intend to lay regulations in the new year and commence the scheme in the summer. The Government has also set out our approach to China. It will be consistent and strategic. We will challenge where we must in order to keep our country safe, compete where we need to, and cooperate where we can, for example, on matters like climate change. That is acting in the national interest, and the Prime Minister reiterated this earlier today. However, Mr. Speaker, the breadth of the threats we face from foreign states are pernicious and complex, and the work of our intelligence agencies is unrivalled in mitigating them. And I want to take this opportunity today to pay tribute to them and to the amazing work that they do to keep our country safe. Today, as ever, they will be pursuing those who wish to do us harm, including those from foreign states. We support them now and always in these efforts, and they will know that at any point when the UK's national security is at risk, we will not hesitate to use every tool at our disposal to keep our country safe.
Can I just say, there's 2 things I want to just put on the record. It would have been easier for the government to come with a statement. Obviously, there was more to say than the allocated time. And I'll say to Sir Iain, please don't tell the media what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and trying to bounce the chair into making that decision. If anybody else had put in, I would have given it to them on the basis that I'm not playing the tune through the media. But I would say to the government, it would be helpful if they came forward with statements rather than being dragged to the counter here as well. So please, hopefully we can all learn from that. And here's a good example how it will be done. Sir Iain Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I apologise if that was the case. Can I just say that Yang Tembo at H6 was in fact not a lone wolf. He was one of some 40,000 members of the United Works Department, which the Intelligence and Security Committee report last year said, and I quote, and known to government, had penetrated every sector of the UK economy, spying, stealing intellectual property, influencing and shaping our institutions. We don't know that our agents now are frustrated by lack of action, as they say, but they don't seem to have the tools they need to deal with this, and one of those tools is staring us in the face. So will the government commit to putting China now in the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, and will they do it now? No more delay. There is no need for delay. The Interparliamentary Alliance on China, IPAC, found that H6, Hemming Bo, has already been well known as a United Front member and is known to others who are already now deep in the political establishment. Parliamentarians are exposed to the United Front as well on a regular basis. So will the Minister remedy that today and accept now that China is our most prominent security threat and all action must take priority? My right honourable friend, the member for Tunbridge and Westmoreland, the previous Security Minister, said publicly that the Department was ready to name China in the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, would have forced United Front members like H6 to register or face serious consequences. So given that, and that it is available to do, why have we not done it yet? And is it true, as being reported by some papers, the Times included, that the government is now under pressure behind the scenes from banks and the wider business community, and including government departments, not to do it? And when it comes to a member of the royal family, I simply say this. How was it that somebody who was known to the Security Committee, to the security forces, was allowed to get so close to a member of the royal family without proper scrutiny exposing them? Finally, I note today that the Prime Minister said, in response to this issue, he quotes, we will cooperate where we can, particularly on environmental issues, and challenge where we must, particularly on human rights issues. But I finish with this. If the Prime Minister means this, then why are we still buying huge numbers of solar arrays from China made demonstrably using slave labour? Surely this statement is clearly incorrect. Far from challenging China on human rights, it now appears we are turning a blind eye to them. Why is that?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me firstly come to the points the right honourable gentleman made about FIRS. Because upon our arrival in government, we found that FIRS was not ready to be implemented, as has been claimed. And since coming into office, we have ensured that there are now more people than ever working on FIRS implementation. The case management team have been recruited and are now in place. As I said earlier on in my opening remarks, we plan to lay the regulations that underpin the scheme early in the new year, ahead of the scheme going live in the summer. And as we've previously committed, we will provide 3 months' notice of the scheme go-live date to enable all of those who will be affected by it adequate time to prepare. Now, I think it's also worth me making the point, Mr. Speaker, that the scheme will be underpinned by an IT solution consisting of a registration platform, a case management system, and an online public register. The IT programme developed under the previous government was not ready for the scheme to go live, and plans were not sufficiently robust. This government has progressed at pace the work to ensure that we are in a position to launch FIRS with the laying of the regulations in the new year with a view to the scheme going live in the summer. I also say to the right honourable gentleman that work is underway to identify which foreign powers will be placed on the enhanced tier. That will be based on robust security and intelligence analysis. The Home Secretary and I plan to begin setting out the government's approach to the use of the enhanced tier in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first duty of government is national security, and the threat that the country faces is the most complex and evolving we have ever seen. Given the range of threats we face from hostile state actors, it is important the government takes action to protect our critical national infrastructure from cyber attacks and ransomware attacks. Can the Minister update us on the plans announced in the King's speech for a new bill on cyber resilience and other actions to improve protections in this area?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. I think he makes a very important point. We are working at pace with colleagues across government, including in the FCDO and in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, to progress these matters. There is a lot of work going on across government to ensure that we are resilient as we possibly can to the threats that we face from a range of actors. But he can be assured, as can the House, that this government will use all necessary measures to protect our security and ensure that our critical national infrastructure is as resilient as it possibly can be.
So, Secretary of State Chris Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by thanking the Security Minister and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster for the security briefing they arranged earlier today for the Shadow Foreign Secretary and I. We are grateful for his assistance. Mr. Speaker, Chinese infiltration of public organisations is of grave concern, but it's not just public organisations such as government. It's also businesses and universities that are being systemically infiltrated. And often intellectual property theft is at the heart of what the Chinese government are trying to achieve. When I was Technology Minister, I saw this in areas like artificial intelligence, quantum computing and others. And I think intellectual property theft of cutting-edge technology is something I would like to hear the Security Minister talk a little about in a moment. Mr. Speaker, last year the head of MI5, Ken McCallum, said that Chinese activity seeking to infiltrate our institutions is, and I quote, on an epic scale. Last year there were multiple attempts by Chinese companies to get hold of sensitive technology, and MI5 estimate that 20,000 individuals have been approached by Chinese agents who are trying to influence them or forge contacts in some way. And it's likely that at some point, either in the past or in the future, every member of this House will be contacted or attempted to be contacted in one form or another. Now, Mr Speaker, the opposition will fully support the government in working to secure our nation's safety. But in that spirit, I would just ask one or two questions. Firstly, would he consider expediting the implementation of the foreign influence registration scheme that he referred to? And can I echo my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford and Woodford Green's suggestion that China is placed in the enhanced tier of that? Secondly, will the Security Minister review the wisdom of the government's approach to China? I think given what we've learnt and what we know, these very close relations that the Prime Minister is apparently attempting may not be wise, and the rather sycophantic tone the Prime Minister took with President Xi at the G20 a few weeks ago may not be very wise in light of what we now know. So, Mr Speaker, Chinese infiltration and intellectual property theft is a very grave concern, and I would welcome some further comments on the Security Minister as to what he will do to combat that.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Firstly, can I say to the Shadow Home Secretary that we were pleased to offer the briefing, because these are important matters that should not divide us. So it will always be the approach of this government that where we can work cooperatively with all members of this House on matters relating to national security, then we will seek to do so. I think he made some important points about matters relating to business and to higher education, to universities. And as a former technology minister, I know that he speaks with authority and expertise specifically on matters relating to intellectual property theft. And that is an important point for him to make. And I completely share the concerns. It's completely unacceptable that any entity, whether they be a hostile state or other, seeks to draw intellectual property out of our country. And that is a matter that this government takes very seriously. He made the point about the comments of the Director General MI5, Ken McCallum. I would say to him that the National Security and Investment Act provides a framework for this government, as it did for the previous government, with dealing some of these matters. And in terms of the specific questions he raised, he asked me again about FIRS. I hope I've been able to provide some reassurance in terms of the government's intention to lay the regulations as soon as practically possible in the new year, with a view to having the scheme up and running by the summer. In terms of the approach to China, I don't agree with his characterisation of the Prime Minister's recent meeting, and I would just say very gently to him, at least he didn't take him to the pub for a pint.
Neil Coyle.
Will the broader China audit include an assessment of the number of Chinese Communist Party operatives working in the UK, including through bodies like the HKETO? Will the Minister ensure everyone targeted, whether members of this place, members of the royal family or members of the public with British national overseas status originally from Hong Kong, have access to tailored security support?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Firstly, in terms of the audit, we are working with other government departments to carry out an audit of the UK's relationship with China. And that is being done to improve our ability to understand and respond to both the challenges and the opportunities that China poses. It is vital that we have a thorough understanding of the bilateral relationship with China, including where we need to challenge to protect the UK's national security. The audit is ongoing. Its outcomes will guide a consistent and coherent approach to China. In terms of British national overseas, this is a matter which I know that the Honourable Gentleman has pursued rightly for some significant amount of time. And this reflects the UK's historic and moral commitment to those people of Hong Kong who chose to retain their ties to the UK by taking up the BNO status at the point of Hong Kong's handover to China in 1997. BNO status holders and their families are making significant contributions to our economy and local communities. And from its introduction on the 31st of January 2021 to the end of September 2024, over 215,000 visas were granted on the route.
The Real Democrat spokesperson, Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Member for bringing this urgent question on what is a crucially important question for us all in this place, because we are looking for robust action from this government to keep our politics and democracy safe from the influence of foreign governments. And we shouldn't pretend for a moment that the case of H6 is in any way unique or unusual, because, as we've heard, the MI5 Director General, Ken McCallum, has warned that bodies like the UFWD are mounting patient, well-funded, deceptive campaigns to buy and exert influence. We see it in our business world, we see it in our universities. And in my constituency of Edinburgh West, where we have the Chinese consulate, I have on more than one occasion been personally chastised by the consul for expressing my views about the Uyghur Muslims or speaking up for the Hong Kong residents in this country. So it is a serious problem. In fact, I was filmed once by a mysterious drone speaking at a Hong Kong protest. But we need that robust action to clamp down on things like the police stations, which we have heard about existing in this country. So as the government at the moment is saying that it is seeking closer relationships with China, how can the Minister reassure us that the government will not weaken its stance, will not weaken its robustness against Chinese influence in this country, or in human rights, democracy in Taiwan and Hong Kong, and protect us all from this insidious approach?
Thank you. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her question and her remarks. I can assure her that this government is and will be taking the robust action that is required to combat the nature of the threat that she rightly characterised. She's right to say that the particular circumstances of the case that we're discussing today is not unique, and there is a much wider threat that the government is working with the intelligence agencies and with partners to combat. I think she will understand that on matters relating to China, the government does have to weigh a number of considerations. And whilst, of course, national security will always be the sort of primary responsibility and is the thing that we take most seriously, there is, and there would have been for the previous government, of course, a requirement to look for areas where we can cooperate. So the truth of the matter is we have to balance that relationship, but I can absolutely give her an assurance that we will take the robust action that is required, including through the Defending Democracy.
Infiltrate our institutions. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of all of us, can I ask the Minister to pass on his thanks to all of those who work in the security services for the vital work that they do to most of us that will never know or never see, but which is constantly protecting us from those threats?
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for making that point. By necessity, of course, the work that our intelligence services does is in the shadows. But I have to say, since coming into this particular role a number of months ago, I've been extremely impressed by the professionalism and the dedication of those men and women who work incredibly hard to keep our country safe. We all, across this House and across the country, owe them a debt of gratitude, and I will absolutely make sure that that is passed on to them.
Chair of the Select Committee, Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I urge the Minister to introduce the first scheme as soon as possible and commence it at the earliest possible opportunity? And can I ask him what steps the Home Office is taking to ensure that the proposed new Chinese embassy in the Royal Mint site has proper oversight and that we do not allow it to become a new base for spies?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee for her questions, and I know that the Home Secretary looks forward to appearing in front of her committee tomorrow. She mentioned the embassy. I think she probably will know that the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government has called in the application in line with current planning policy. The planning decision sits solely with the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, the Deputy Prime Minister, and of course she will understand that I'm not able to say anything more about that, but a final decision will be made in due course. She also asked about FIRS. I can give her an assurance that we are progressing FIRS at pace. It is the government's strong intention to introduce FIRS as soon as practically possible, and to that end we intend to lay the regulations as soon as possible in the new year.
What?
Secretary referred to sycophancy towards the Chinese. I think that charge is better directed at his own side. It's less than 5 years since Theresa May went to Beijing, and she was praised by the state media on that trip, and I know this because I was on that trip in a former career. She was praised for, quote, sidestepping human rights issues in the furtherance of the wider necessities of the trip. Does the Security Minister agree with me that that's not the right approach for the Chinese?
Mr. Speaker, I do agree. I don't think that that is the right approach. I think the current government's approach is the right one. I've laid out the strategic approach that we intend to adopt with China. We have to be clear-headed about the nature of the threat that we face, but of course we also have to look for areas where we can cooperate as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year as Home Secretary, I made the decision to exclude Yang Zhenbo from the UK because his presence posed a threat to our national security. That decision was based on the advice of MI5, and I'm very pleased that the High Court has upheld that decision. I say this gently to the Minister, but isn't it regrettable that it's taken a high-profile case, public outcry and opposition MPs dragging the Minister to the Chamber to finally get the government to commit to implementing the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, a scheme that we enacted and that was ready to go at the time of the general election. Given the unprecedented threat posed by China, malicious cyber attacks, transnational repression, the Confucius Institutes, Chinese police stations, and of course the human rights abuses of the Uyghur Muslims, if the government's really serious about tackling the Chinese threat, when will it list China on the enhanced tier?
Minister? Well, I wasn't going to make this point, but given the Right Honourable Lady has made her point in the way that she has, I will just gently point out that the previous government had a significant period of time from the passing of the national security. Well, the Right Honourable Lady shakes her head. It is a statement of fact to say that the previous government had a significant amount of time, many months, from the passing of the National Security Act, where they could have chosen to implement the first scheme. They didn't implement the first scheme. It now falls to this government to do so, and that is precisely what we will do.
Dun Aldridge.
Mr. Speaker, it's disappointing that some members opposite are trying to turn what should be a moment of collective unity in the face of a shared security threat into a political row instead. Does the Security Minister agree with me? It is pretty incredible for the party whose Defence Secretary was sacked for leaking vital intelligence information about the Huawei 5G contract to now pose as the protector of our country's national security.
Well, I'm grateful to him, and I agree. The approach of this government will always be to work constructively across the House on matters relating to national security. But given the record of certain Right Honourable and Honourable members opposite, I suggest perhaps humility might be the order of the day for some of them.
Tom Tugendar.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. Look, I don't want to go over this readiness of the first scheme again and again. I just leave it that I was assured by the same officials who sit in the box advising him that it was ready to go by the end of the year. Clearly the advice has changed. There's only one thing in the department that's changed, and that's the party leading it. So I can only assume that there's a change of intent. But I'm delighted that it will be ready to go by the summer, better late than never. The real question, of course, is whether it'll be worth having. And the advice from MI5 was very, very clear. If China isn't in the enhanced tier, it's not worth having. Will China be in that tier?
Thank you. Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman. He knows that I take these matters incredibly seriously. He and I have known each other for a very long time, and therefore I know that he will take on trust my assertion to him and to the House that the scheme wasn't ready to go when we arrived in government in July of this year. We are working at pace. I've given a time frame for the House today, and I've also said that we're looking very carefully, very closely, working with colleagues across government to look at how we can best structure the scheme. And we will make the announcements in the normal way in due course.
Joel Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One weak point in protecting our parliamentary democracy from hostile state actors is money in politics. Does the Security Minister agree with me that this latest case shows it's a priority to ensure our electoral laws are robust enough to ensure that
only funds that are clean and sourced entirely from within the UK fund our political parties, because there seems to be some confusion, certainly from some of the parties opposite.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the honourable gentleman makes a very important point, and I know that he speaks with great authority on this matter. He will know very well that we've just appointed Baroness Hodge as the government's new anti-corruption champion, and she will be supporting the work that we do, looking very carefully at the impact that money, dirty money, has on politics. And he's absolutely right. This government will want to assure itself that the electoral laws that govern the conduct of elections are robust and ensure that there are not opportunities for people from overseas who seek to intervene in our political processes. It is a matter and advice that I think should be taken very seriously by all parties across this House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my Wimbledon constituency, there are many Hong Kongers deeply concerned about surveillance from Chinese agents in this country. Is the Minister able to give my constituents any assurance that their legitimate fears are being addressed by this government?
I'm grateful to him for raising the plight of his constituents. Yes, I am able to give him those assurances. The government takes the kind of interventions that he's referred to very, very seriously. Through the Defending Democracy Task Force, we are looking very carefully at the issue of transnational repression, and we will have more to say about it in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Minister about the integrity of our democracy? And in particular, can I ask what steps he's taking to ensure the integrity of the processes and institutions of our political process, especially, but not only, with regards to China?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman makes a very important point. I mentioned briefly earlier on the importance that this government attaches to the Defending Democracy Task Force. This was a body that we inherited from the previous government. We are working at pace to ensure that it works as effectively across government as it possibly can. And fundamentally, it seeks to address the point he has made about challenging those threats to the integrity of our democracy. This government will ensure that no stone is left unturned in seeking to address these very significant challenges that we all know that we face.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Mr. Speaker, just a few days ago, the head of MI5 talked about having to make uncomfortable choices, and he talked about paring back counter-terrorism operations in order to deal with the huge rise in state threats. Now, if the government means what it says about security being the first priority of the government, will he undertake to make sure MI5 and the security services as a whole have the resources they need to tackle all the threats? And by all means, blame the previous government for the state we're in, but it won't get him very far, because I need him to answer that question.
I think the right honourable gentleman makes a fair point and a good challenge. And I can give him an assurance that the Home Secretary and I work incredibly closely with MI5 and with colleagues across government to make sure that they have the resources they need to do the very difficult job that they do. I mentioned the remarks that Ken McCallum had made in his annual threat lecture back in October. The nature of the threat that we face is more challenging, more complex than at any point during our lifetimes. That does require resource, and it requires an expertise. And the Home Secretary, myself as Security Minister, and all of the government will work to make sure that our security services have the resources they need to do the job.
Alex Burris-Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful for this urgent question, and I thank the Minister for what he said, in particular about the Defending Democracy Task Force. But I wonder if the Minister can assure me as well that not only will the government do all it can to secure our national security, but that with respect to the activities of individuals with known links to the Chinese government and who are considered to be a national security risk, that the fullest of investigations will be done in order to ensure the integrity of our national security.
Mr. Speaker, I can give the honourable member that assurance.
Chris Law.
Mr. Speaker, the United Front Work Department is said to have 40,000 members globally, and Mr Iain Tembo is surely the tip of the iceberg in the UK. They're not only tasked with cultivating relationships with high-level figures that extending influence to British nationals, but in all walks of society. That means the public need to be much more aware of the risk to themselves. So I wanted to ask very specifically, what is the Minister doing to assess the numbers of members in our society And what public awareness campaign are you going to make for my constituents of Dundee and also across these islands?
Mr Speaker, I think the Honourable Member makes an important point about public awareness, and I will take that away and give it further consideration. But with regard to the remarks that he made at the beginning, I think what he has done essentially is underline the importance of why we do need the first scheme. As I've said a number of times before, the Government are committed to implementing the scheme. We're getting on and we will implement it in the new year.
John Slinger.
Mr Speaker, notwithstanding the somewhat chiding tone of some of the comments from honourable members opposite, does the Security Minister agree with me that it is actually possible to both maintain a consistent and long-term relationship with China, as we must, but also to take the robust measures that he has set out today to defend our national interests?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I do agree with the honourable gentleman, and that is the challenge for any government, regardless of political stripe. Yes, of course, national security is the priority and we have to defend against the threats that we face, but we also have to cooperate economically, and this government will seek to balance those two responsibilities.
Mr Speaker, the Security Minister mentions the breadth of the national security threat against the United Kingdom. He mentions Russia, he mentions China, he mentions Iran, but unless I missed it, he didn't mention North Korea, and I wonder whether you make a comment on that. And following on from the my right honourable friend, the member for Harwich and North Essex, on the issue of resources, is the Minister confident that the UK intelligence community across the agencies has sufficient resources to manage the increased threat that he has recognised in this chamber today?
The right honourable gentleman, I know, speaks with real experience and authority on these matters, and he's right to raise the issue of North Korea. In terms of the point he made about resources, I'm not remotely complacent about this at all. Mindful of the nature of the threat that we face, the Home Secretary and I will work with our colleagues across government to ensure that our security services do have the resources they need. We have exceptional people stepping forward to serve, and it is the responsibility of government, regardless of political colour, to ensure that they have the resources, the technology that they need, not just to keep pace with the threat, but to retain a competitive advantage, and we will make sure that they have the resources to do that.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yang Tembo is the alleged Chinese spy who has been stalking the corridors of power in our country and rubbing shoulders with royalty, prime ministers and business leaders, yet his name has been withheld from the great British public. Does the Minister agree with me that it was only withheld to avoid embarrassment of previous prime ministers, business leaders, and was not in the best interests of the British public?
Well, I'm sure the honourable member will acknowledge that I named H6, the individual, that the reason for his initial anonymity was as a result of a court order and was not a decision by the UK government.
Sir Alex Shelbrooke, no less.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the West certainly learnt a lesson when Russia invaded about energy supplies and where it comes from. And I just want to press the Minister, building on what my right honourable friend for Chingford and Woodford Green said, about solar and about renewables, because we are pushing forward in this country, or the government is, with an agenda of pushing quickly towards renewable energy, and yet China manufacture and process a lot of the materials we need. So can I ask the Minister that before we accelerate towards that a full assessment is done on the risks that could happen to our energy supply, because that is a crucial piece of our national security.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm genuinely grateful for the points that the honourable member has just made. I think he makes some reasonable and constructive points, and of course we will consider them further. I mean, I would say to him, and I know that he will acknowledge this, that there are difficult judgments that have to be made by government about these matters, but I can give him an assurance that we will look at these matters with a clear-headed view about what is in the national interest of our country. But in the end, national security will always prevail.
Speaker, would the Minister agree that it's not just the big schemes that need looking at, it's the small ones too? Elite capture can happen at higher education level and infrastructure level too. Peking University HSBC Business School in Oxford wants to expand, The local planning authority narrowly passed it, and I asked for the last government to call it in. Last week, this government has approved the scheme. This is a mistake. The economic benefit is going to be going to the Chinese Communist Party primarily. So will his department have a word with MHCLG? Look at this scheme again, but also what resilience is he offering to local planning authorities on these matters?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for the points that she makes. She's right, it isn't just about the bigger schemes, the smaller schemes are important as well. I think the matter that she referred to essentially was a planning matter, but I will have a look at it further. And in terms of matters relating to higher education, we work closely with colleagues in the Department for Education, and there are mechanisms in place across government where there are concerns that are expressed. We will follow them up.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I acknowledge the transformation in the security threat that's facing this country, and I urge the government to move forward as quickly as they can with the implementation of the first scheme. But I draw the Minister's attention to the website of the US Department of the Treasury, which today gave a readout of the 7th meeting of the Financial Working Group between the US and the People's Republic of China, where an MOU was set out of those discussions in Nanjing. Can I say to the Minister that though it is very uncomfortable, he does everything he can to ensure that we do have a sophisticated relationship with China, and as uncomfortable as it may be, in order to preserve global and financial stability, we need to maintain that relationship in that domain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman, as he always does, has made a very sensible point. I can say to him I haven't yet looked at the US Treasury Department website, but I will look at it and give him an undertaking to report back on it later today. He's right about the sophisticated relationship as he describes it. I can say to him, as someone who knows government well, that these are matters that we take incredibly seriously, and that the National Security Council provides the forum for decision-making across government. A lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of political leadership now goes into ensuring that that is an appropriate forum where collectively we make decisions across government. Some of the decisions are not easy, some of them are more challenging, but we will always seek to do what is in the best interests of our country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has recently put on hold the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act passed last year. Does he feel that that has helped or hindered the work of United Front in our universities, particularly our elite institutions?
I think the Right Honourable Gentleman makes a fair point, and I'm very happy to discuss it with him offline. I mean, I'll look carefully at the suggestion that he has made. I know that it is being considered by colleagues across government, but let me take it away and I'll come back to him.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. China is clearly trying to infiltrate all areas of UK society. Will the Minister outline what meetings he's having with the Department for Business and Trade to ensure the UK is more economically resilient by strengthening foreign direct investment screening and cyber defences, including a particular focus on increased data transparency requirements?
The Honourable Member makes an important point, and I can give him the assurance that we are working collaboratively across government, working with colleagues in the Business and Trade Department, but also in the Cabinet Office. I think he mentioned cyber as well. I mean, I can say to him that that is something that we take incredibly seriously. I was recently at the NCSC. They're doing extraordinary work, working with other partners across government, and we are cooperating closely with other government departments, including DCIT, and we are looking at what more we can do to combat that particular threat.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister assure the House that Chinese investments in the UK are properly scrutinised, particularly those that may be used to acquire leverage over UK policy?
Yes, I can give that assurance.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The original question actually asked about the extent of the United Front Works Department's operations within the United Kingdom. Can I ask the Minister for his assessment and engagement of the work of that department, either with or within the devolved administrations?
The Honourable Member makes an important point. In terms of the nature of the threat, I'd refer him back to the annual threat lecture that the Director General of MI5 gave back in October. But in terms of the devolved administrations, we work incredibly closely with all of them, and I hope at some point to be visiting his part of the world.
Jim Shannon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his answers? And the Minister will be aware that I, along with others in this chamber, have spoken on numerous occasions of the feelings of my British passport holders and those of Chinese origin who are my constituents, and the impression that they have and the threats of the Chinese Communist Party. The issues that the Minister has raised are not surprising, but they do remain concerning. So does the Minister agree that inaction is not an option? And how can the Minister provide the security to Chinese nationalists who are British citizens about their safety and security? Those who I've had to report to the PSNN, the part because I was concerned for their safety as they live their lives in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman has been very consistent in raising this matter previously. Let me give him an absolute assurance that foreign intervention, wherever it comes from, is completely unacceptable, and this government will use all tools at our disposal to combat it. We use the mechanism of the Defending Democracy Task Force, and there is a lot of work going on to look at the issue of transnational repression. So I can assure the honourable member that we take these matters very seriously. But if he has specific concerns that you want to raise with me, I'm always happy to discuss them with him.
Right, that completes the urgent question. We'll let the front benches change over. We now come to the statement. Minister Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to make a statement on the publication of the Government's English Devolution White Paper. Mr. Speaker, this Government was elected on the promise of change, and we are determined to transform our economy, our country, through a decade of reform and national renewal that reverses the chaos and decline we inherited, rebuilding Britain from the ground up so that it works for working people, with a mission-led plan for change that unlocks growth and raises living standards in every region, delivering new homes, jobs and opportunities for all, by matching investment with reform to improve local services and to maximise the impact of every penny we spend. Mr. Speaker, the British people deserve an economy that works for the whole country, with control over things that matter to them, which is why we're moving power out of Westminster and putting it back into the hands of those who know their areas best. The white paper we published today sets out the means by which we want to achieve this, backed up by our landmark English Devolution Bill, which will finally redress the imbalance of power between this place and communities up and down the country. And, Mr. Speaker, this change cannot be delivered soon enough, because for all the promises of levelling up, after 14 years, our nations remain economically divided, with living standards in many parts of the country stagnating. We have an economy that hoards potential, and we have a politics that hoards power. As a former councillor and council leader, I have seen the difference that local leadership can make, and in such an immediate and a tangible way. But I also recognise the frustration that local leaders face in delivering the change that their areas need. In fact, it mirrors the frustration local people feel in being able to affect change in their neighbourhoods and on their high streets. And it hits at the heart of what it means to live a decent life, with pride of place and security, a right too often denied in the places where it's needed the most. Which is why this government is determined to end the top-down approach to decision-making in this country and replace it with a principle of partnership. The last Labour government began the process of change by creating the London Mayor, the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Senate and the Northern Ireland Assembly. And I have seen the transformational impact of empowered local leadership in Greater Manchester when, in 2014, Now, a decade ago, I was one of the local council leaders who worked in cooperation to agree the first English devolution agreement outside of London, an agreement that created the combined authority which has delivered genuine change under the leadership of an elected mayor working hand in glove with local leaders. Now, crucially, none of the now 12-strong mayors would claim that they do this alone. Whether it's attracting investment in clean carbon, renewable energy investment, growing digital and creative industries, bringing buses back under public control, tackling violence against women and girls, all would point to solid local partnerships and the importance of local government in delivering that change. But the truth in England is that the process of devolution remains unfinished, which is why we are introducing the measures before you today to finally get the job done. At its core, this white paper sets out how the government will strengthen and widen the mayoral model of devolution across England, shifting power, decision-making and money away from Westminster as part of a completely new way of governing and driving growth. And empowering more mayors through integrated funding settlements, a statutory role in the rail network, greater control over strategic planning and housing funding and skills training so that they can deliver change that local people can see and benefit from. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, our goal is mayoral devolution at a level that means that powers can be used to shape local labour markets, integrated transport systems, clusters of businesses and housing development. The sorts of strategic decision making that it's not possible to do over a smaller geographic area. By creating strategic authorities as a new tier of local government, we will give our cities and our regions a bigger voice in getting the resources and the support that they need. The government will shortly set out its devolution priority programme for areas who stand ready to progress devolution at an accelerated timetable, with a plan for inaugural mayor elections to take place in May 2026. Each of these areas will have an elected mayor sitting on the Council of Nations and Regions, and for those areas already in discussions with the government, we will work with you to confirm your position. And for those areas ready to move at a pace, we say, come forward now, be part of this movement, be part of this moment. But we also understand that devolution is a journey and that some will need to take their time to decide what course they wish to follow. We want to walk alongside all areas defined locally, not imposed by a map from the centre, to take the first step to realise the potential of devolution, for instance, through a foundation agreement to unlock new powers. But our ambition is absolutely clear, and we will legislate for a new power of ministerial directive which allows government to create strategic authorities where absolutely necessary, if local agreement has not been possible to achieve full coverage of devolution across England. We will deliver a new constitutional settlement for England that makes devolution the default setting, with an ambitious devolution framework secured in law, guaranteeing powers for each level of devolution. And all of this will be underpinned by improvements to accountability, including an outcomes framework for integrated settlements so that it remains fit for purpose as we devolve more powers and funding. And, Mr. Speaker, none of this reform can be achieved without strong local government. Councils are the bedrock of our state. They are critical to driving growth, delivering local public services that people can rely on. But they've been neglected for far too long. That's why we're establishing a proper partnership with local leaders through multi-year funding settlements and moving away from the farcical bidding wars for limited ring-fence funding pots. And we'll give councils the respect and powers that they deserve and need to deliver the missions and the plan for change that is so keenly felt in every community. We said we would reset the relationship between central and local government, and we meant it, giving councils the certainty and stability they need to plan ahead and prioritise their budget to tackle local issues through public sector reform and prevention, rather than more expensive crisis management where taxpayers are paying more for often worsening outcomes. We have to tackle this head on. And, Mr. Speaker, it's also important that councils are the right size and shape to serve the people that they represent, with simpler structures that people can better understand. Through our bold programme of unitarisation, as announced by my honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the budget, We will ensure that local government reorganisation and devolution can be delivered in tandem as soon as possible, and we look forward to areas coming forward with their own proposals. This gives the clear direction that local government have been asking for. My door is always open for discussions with colleagues about how this will look and feel in their area. And though I recognise that this will be challenging as a process for some, for many there is a growing agreement that the time has now come for change. And Mr Speaker, I'm under no illusions about the scale of the task we face to deliver more power into the hands of local leaders. But we are committed to resetting the relationship with local and regional government, working together with local leaders to deliver the change the country voted for, and by which the electorate will judge this government on. Placed alongside the work we're progressing on fixing the broken audit system, rebuilding the standards regime, and bringing forward plans for community power, it shows the government is determined to get the House in order and to see a top-to-bottom redistribution of power in England. As we reset our economy, restore local government and rebuild our country from the ground up so that it works finally for working people. And in the end, that's what it means to take back control, and that's what we will deliver. I commend the statement to the House.
Shall the Minister?
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. According to the Ipsos Mori Veracity Index, 41% of our constituents trust local councillors, with just 19% having the same expectation of government ministers. That is a reflection of the value that we place on local leaders.
It's a current survey.
On local leaders who know and understand our communities. And those local leaders, Mr Speaker, will be getting a very clear message from this white paper, that this government feels that the men from Whitehall know best what their place needs. Not bottom-up local leadership, but top-down templates for local government. Not the chance to flourish as a place and a community with a unique identity and history, with an expectation of being subsumed into an anonymous structure that knows and cares little for local areas, focusing instead on Whitehall targets. And through the back door, Madam Deputy Speaker, by stripping local politicians of a say over important planning decisions and the imposition of financial assumptions that further constrain local decision-making, our local democracy is undermined. Mr Speaker, or Madam Deputy Speaker, instead of genuine devolution, what this white paper sets out is a reductive approach. It's a mishmash of new tiers, new taxes, taking decision-making further distance away from residents, and if the experience of London is anything to go by, costing them a fortune at the same time. And more concerning still, Madam Deputy Speaker, it fails the key test of starting with a clear understanding of what we require our local councils to actually do. Over 800 services delivered by each council on average, ranging from education, public health, environmental standards, children, vulnerable adult safeguarding, early years, libraries, museums, not to mention their key regulatory functions, such as trading standards, housing enforcement, and acting as the billing authority for billions in taxes. It's hard to see how demanding that all those local officers simultaneously reapply for their own jobs will help them to focus on the needs of their communities, not to mention cope with huge additional responsibilities heading their way via legislation such as the Renters' Rights Bill. Nor, Madam Deputy Speaker, does it build on the successes that we already see. It's common for councils to share services and staff to reduce the cost to taxpayers. Breckland and South Holland have shared a chief executive for many years. Trading standards has been a shared service across London for a long time, and those measures driven by local leadership are what deliver genuine savings and also service improvements. So let us look, Madam Deputy Speaker, at some of the most serious concerns that we on this side have arising from the bill, above and beyond the years of disruption to council services and the rising taxes. At a time when Labour councils are telling this government that it is already failing on its housing targets and that its plans are undeliverable, why would the government be focusing on removing elected councillors' say on planning, rather than focusing on building the more than 1 million units that already have planning permission, or electing mayors to a timetable which is not in any way clear? At a time when our constituents are labouring under a rising tax burden, the chilling prospect set out of mayoral levies charged at nil rates by Conservative mayors such as Ben Houchen and Andy Street but now topping at £471 per bandy household in London under Mayor Khan. Wow. The black hole in local government finances, Madam Deputy Speaker, just got bigger. And imposing mayoral control over grant funding for housing and regeneration, detaching it from the host communities, moving those decisions to a remote mayoral tier, further undermines that concept of local consent for development. Yeah. But perhaps most worrying for local council taxpayers are the plans around Great British Energy local power plans, with the potential to take even more local authorities to the edge of bankruptcy, as local energy companies have already done in Nottingham and Bristol. Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, this could have been so much more. A chance to rethink from scratch the duties, the responsibilities and the funding of local government, and to ensure that its form follows its function. Our local leaders, many from my own party, will do their best with what is available, and we will have their backs as they do what they can for the interests of the people that they serve. But make no mistake, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a massive missed opportunity. This white paper shows that rewiring our state, rethinking our approach to local government, fulfilling the aspirations of local leaders and communities are being put aside in favour of bureaucratic and structural tinkering. There is a minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, who once stood at this dispatch box and called for genuine fiscal devolution, the devolution of powers across things like education, and demanded, Madam Deputy Speaker, more say for local people to hold decision makers to account. Whatever happened to that local champion, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll come to some of the questions that were raised, but let nobody in this chamber take lessons and lectures from the other side when it comes to the perilous state that local government has been left in, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let's talk about the councils that were going bust left, right and centre on their watch. Let's talk about the fiscal discipline on 1,000 audit backlogs. And what does 1,000 audit backlogs mean? It means £100 billion of public money they couldn't account for and that held up the national accounts being signed off. That was their legacy, and they talk about being custodians of public money. They didn't even know where the money was. And what about the crisis that was building up in adult social care, in children's, in homelessness? At the time when we should have been about prevention and reform and getting ahead of the problem, government essentially were making matters worse and not better. And so when they talk about the legacy, and on the side of councillors, which was the government that eroded the standards regime, that left councillors open to abuse, to intimidation, that turned council chambers into hostile, toxic environments where the teeth from the standards regime was completely put to one side? Which was the government that made councillors publish their home addresses when they were facing death threats? Where were they? And the work that we're doing now to repair the foundations of local government, giving it the funding that's needed, and after a decade of year-by-year funding, giving it a multi-year financial settlement so it can get its house in order, is part of the rebuilding work. And that's what's needed now. Grown-up politics, a plan to fix the country, a plan to put local government back on its feet. But just doing that is not enough. We have got to break the centralising system. Literally, if you wanted £1 million for a local project, the previous government made you compete with your neighbouring council for a limited supply of money. The bidding wars that took place, it wasted millions of pounds of public money and in the end did not deliver up on its core promise of levelling up. That was the agenda, and it's got to change. We have got to change that cap-in-hand relationship, that parent-child relationship, where the power is hoarded at the centre. And I can say, those that are queuing up to have conversations about reforming public services, about devolving powers to mayoral combined authorities, maybe not the people on the front bench here, but it is Conservative council leaders who recognise they finally have a government on side willing to work in partnership to do the changes the previous government failed to.
Chair of the Select Committee, Florence Seshamole. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I think just to thank the Minister for this statement, and it's about how we bring local leaders back to the agenda and back to some of the central aims that they've been complaining about over the last 14 years. And it's important that any devolution reforms builds trust amongst local people who rely on those vital services from housing, planning, social care. So the Minister must keep this in mind as he's going through the reforms. But ultimately, there will be some councils who may fear that residents' voices in smaller district areas may lose that if they're absorbed into larger unitary authorities. So can the Minister outline how he'll ensure that residents do not feel disenfranchised by losing representation in their community? And should residents choose not to adopt a mayoral model, can the Minister assure this House that those residents will not be disadvantaged? We know that our frontline services are at breaking point. The Minister's outlined this, and I think many will welcome the multi-year settlement. But what we don't want to see is a case where adult social care, temporary accommodation, all those areas become stuck between a disbanding district authority and the nebulous unitary authority. So can the Minister assure the House that there'll be proper accountability during the reorganisation and we won't see local residents and councillors left in limbo?
Can I thank the Chair of this Select Committee for that very important point in terms of how do we maintain public trust and confidence in a period of change. Well, first of all, is to say that local government representations coming to government will be self-organised within counties, and we will receive in the recommendations and requests that are coming forward. So we will be writing out to all of the 21 areas in scope, inviting them to make representations to be part of a first wave priority programme. We expect from conversations that we've had already that there will be a significant number of local authorities who want to be part of that reorganisation. But to be clear, that is not a list that we hold, that we're imposing. We are writing out, and local areas are self-organising because they understand that reform and modernisation is absolutely central. Now, when it comes to not losing a local voice, if members read the white paper as it stands, we were very clear to make sure that the devolution offer isn't just about creating new structures, and certainly is not about just creating new politicians. This has got to be a genuine shift of power, and there's a big section in there on community power. Because in the end, I think a lot of people, and maybe this even transcends the previous government still, do not have power in the places where they live. They feel quite often that things are done to them, and when they look at the decline of the high streets and town centres, they feel quite often that the change is just going one way and it's not good. And so the paper is about rebuilding that local community power, and our expectation is, regardless of the size of local authority, that every council, including existing unitaries, work a way of getting to those local communities at a neighbourhood level and to reflect in a democratic way and a public service way how best to give local people a voice. And our expectation in the white paper is absolutely clear on that.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Local councils are the backbone of our communities, delivering services to every home and business. And under the last Conservative government, their funding was slashed while their responsibilities were broadened, which means that many are now facing a financial precipice not of their making, and as they are the ones alongside residents, they're usually the ones in the firing line when people and businesses are distressed. I've faced local government reorganisation before when leader of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. 5 years on in Dorset, the public are not convinced that large unitaries work for them. They don't see services improve, they just see a more remote council that has to cover a much bigger area, moving money from where it was raised to be spent elsewhere, and through an organisation that can't understand the differing needs. Scale that up even further, and I fear that more issues and individual community needs will slip through the net. The paper talks of mutual respect and collective purpose, but by giving such extended powers and the ability to lever a mayoral tax to mayors, I wonder if the Minister could confirm what specifically will be left for council leaders. For my area of Wessex, which of course is Thomas Hardy country, rather than being well-known local leaders, the creation of a mega mayor is more likely to be compared to Jude the Obscure. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm deeply concerned about the impact on local authority staff, both now and for prospects in the future, including their ability to move between councils to develop their skills. Councils have already rationalised staffing to make ends meet and shared services, as was referenced by the Shadow Minister, and they will struggle to reinvent again. What plans does the Government have to ensure local authorities will be sufficiently funded to implement such changes and to limit the outflow of millions of pounds to consultants to make this happen? And turning to the role of elected members, the lived experience of these community leaders is so worthwhile, and I'm deeply concerned about the loss of districts and district councillors and a move to the strategically elected members. Those people are likely to be required to travel much further and give so much more of their time, making it harder for people with caring responsibilities or full-time careers to serve. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, the paper brings forward potential sanctions for breaches of standards, which is very welcome, but says little about how we reset the relationship with those councillors to make sure that the time and effort that they put in is properly reflected. The White Paper fails to say anything about the ticking time bomb of social care in any meaningful way, and its reference to the financial crisis being faced up and down the country hints at further devolution. But it does say that further things may require. My question. What can the Minister do to ensure that local communities are able to avoid feeling like this is a top-down diktat and make their own decisions about the future?
Before I come to the Minister, can I just remind members that time is a bit of a premium here. If I want to get everybody in, Minister.
Thank you. Can I thank the opposition spokesperson for the question, and also for her service, of course, as an elected member for a period as well. I understand there will be concerns about the move to larger unitaries, but the fact is there is a two-tier premium that the taxpayer is paying for. And at a time when resources are limited, we do have a responsibility to take money from overhead costs in councils in the back office and to get them to the front lines so people have good neighbourhood services. And I would suspect, when asked the question, do you prefer an existing two-tier system or more money being directed at local public services, most people would want the money to go to local public services. But there is a balance here, and it's for local areas to get that scale. We're very clear in the White Paper that we want to move away from councillors being perceived as backbench councillors, and we want to reform them essentially as frontline councillors of the conveners of a community with greater power, influence and the ability to get things done. And on the matter of social care, there was an additional £4 billion provided in the budget. The provisional settlement will be announced this week, and of course £600 million of that was for a recovery grant to go to areas with high deprivation but low tax bases to make sure that we rebalance the fairness in the system.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister in his statement said that this was the end of a top-down approach from central government, but to many of my constituents this looks a lot like a one-size-fits-all model that works for Greater Manchester, which he represents quite ably, but doesn't necessarily work for the rural English counties. So what assurance can the Minister give my constituents, and frankly me, that this will not be imposed upon local areas against their will, and how will he measure consent from a local area that this is the approach that they want?
Can I thank the Honourable Member for the question and also for submitting the Westminster Hall debate on this very issue. We don't accept at all the one-size-fits-all argument any more than to say that councillors work in some areas but not others, members of parliament work in some areas but not others. In the end, mayors, when given the powers and the resources, can achieve change in partnership with local leaders. We are not creating super councils, we are creating a strategic authority that gives power from this place downwards and allows councillors to have far more power. Now, how we do it with local areas to come, and I think what I can say in Lancashire is that in our kind of drive to widen devolution across the country, the principle there is for foundation authorities, but of course Lancashire has already agreed to a level 2, which in the White Paper would be the equivalent of foundation authority, and in that sense has devolution already in place.
Sir Edward Lee.
So the government says it wants to end the top-down approach. How does this square with a district council like West Lindsey in Lincolnshire being denied any say in massive solar farms or wind turbines? Indeed, will he do me a favour and confirm that his aim is to pass more power back to district councils, and indeed will he promise me that he will not unilaterally abolish them just because we have a new mayor for Lincolnshire?
Well, it'd be a bit rude to diminish the powers of the Mayor of Lincolnshire before it was in place, particularly given that I'm the person moving the order to enable the election to happen. We want the Mayor of Greater Lincolnshire to be a success. We could have taken a different view. It was the legacy agreement that was carried over from the general election. But genuinely, and those are leaders of different parties than my own, I recognise that the leaders there worked in good faith to have an agreement with the previous government that we felt needed to be honoured. And so there is no willingness on our side to do that. And that needs to be the tone of all these conversations. If you take out party politics, and there can be quite a lot of that takes place in this place, Those are not the conversations that I have with council leaders and councillors across the country who genuinely want to put party politics to one side and to work in the interests of their local community. When it comes to the question of the power over local planning decisions, if local councils want power, local councils have got to have a plan.
Emma Llewellyn-Buck.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Decisions taken in this place are subject to rigorous scrutiny and accountability. But recent history in several areas show that this is not always the case when it comes to local decision making. Not all councillors and mayors are paragons of virtue. So as we dissolve more powers, can my honourable friend explain what levels of scrutiny and accountability will be built into his plans?
Minister.
It's a very important point, and we're very mindful in a sense because devolution in England has really been developed by deal rather than a clear framework from the outset. There are naturally gaps, and I don't decry, by the way, that progress was made in filling the map of, in particular, the Midlands and the north of England previously. But we do need to reconcile that now. If we're giving more powers and resources downwards, we need to make sure that the checks and balances are robust, and there is a lot that we need to do. So there are recommendations in the white paper that talk about the principles, say, of a local public accounts committee, so that public spending can be brought into scope of that. We are looking at the oversight for bodies that strategic authorities establish, such as trading companies or joint ventures, to see whether they should be in scope of best value, for instance. And we're also looking at the kind of checks and balances for the officer structure, about whether or not we bring in an accountable officer type structure in the way that a local authority does, to make sure that there is a clear difference between the political leadership and the operational leadership and the powers that each have.
Gagan Mahindra.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. Welcome the Minister to his place. First opportunity I've had to do so. As his department will be aware, both Decorum and Three Rivers in my constituency do not have a local plan in place, both controlled by the Lib Dems. Can the Minister confirm what would happen in the case of his proposed plans? Separate to that, we have local county elections next May. What is his intentions? Do they still go ahead? There's a lot of uncertainty. And in terms of 2026, how many mayoral elections is he anticipating?
Minister.
Thank you. I mean, on the point around a local plan, if any area at this point has failed to get a local plan in place, they are leaving the door open to development to take place without any of the checks and balances and in a way that really does take away local power. And we are trying to reconcile that now, where we're getting the balance. And I hear quite often about the housing targets that have been set and the 1.5 million new homes. I should say, by the way, there's lots of good, skilled working class jobs that go with that 1.5 million new homes. But there are 150 kids in temporary accommodation who need a home. There are 500 kids in hotels in my constituency who deserve a secure, affordable place to live. And so there is a bigger crisis here, which is why local plans are so important. Where they are not in place, we are going to have to look at strategic plans looking at those areas. And obviously, we're out to consultation on a number of those points. On the question of county elections, so the letter will go out today to county councils. It will invite them to make a submission in January. Subject to that submission being robust, it can be part of a priority programme. We will do what the previous government did and to accept the view that if a local authority will not exist in the near future, it makes no sense to make an election to it. However, we will very soon after want to have an election for the shadow authority that will follow. And so further detail will follow on that.
Oliver Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his white paper? There are 5 pages at the back of this white paper of powers that are not currently enjoyed by Lancashire as a foundation authority. Would he agree to work with partners in Lancashire to make sure that we can get a deal done and over the line for a mayoral and a reorganisation package? Lancashire's time is now, and in his words, can we grasp this moment and this movement? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, I'm glad somebody was listening. I think there's huge opportunities in Lancashire. If we think about the work that's been done now to secure a mayoral combined authority in Hull and East Yorkshire, if we think about the opportunities in Cumbria, in Cheshire and Lancashire, that completes the map of the North. Our leaders there are already self-organising through the Great North Project, chaired by Mayor Kim McGuinness, to really kind of lead from the front on inward investment. And it would be a shame, given the economic success that Lancashire has, particularly on energy and other issues, that it's not part of that agenda. And I should say on reorganisation, I do think that most people in Lancashire do accept that the time after probably 20 years or more of talking about it had probably come, but it is for local areas to come together, to have a plan that's right for their place and to make a submission to government. It's not for government to redraw the map of England and to impose it on every community. but our ambition is clear and the direction is clear, that we absolutely welcome areas making that submission, and we want to work towards more mayoral combined authorities.
Lewis Cocking.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I place on record my thanks to my two district councils who I wholeheartedly support, Broxbourne and East Herts. On page 17 of the White Paper, it says the government wants to create unitaries of 500,000 or more. What does or more mean? Does that mean I could end up with a super council for Hertfordshire covering 1.2 million people, a proposal which I would not support?
Minister.
Well, in some ways, we have to give direction, because what we heard during the consultation stage with local government, and that includes, by the way, the county council network and the district council network, is the more clarity of a framework that can be provided by central government up front, far better for local government to be able to then organise. And so we were very clear that on an efficiency level, if the drive is for efficiency, that 500,000 is roughly the population that you would need to draw out those efficiencies. And so in the example that he gave, that wouldn't be 1.2 million, that might be, say, 2 or even 3, because in areas where areas are in discussions for a mayoral combined authority, we have accepted, and it's outlined in the paper, that there will need to be some flexibility in terms of scale and size of the local authorities that sit under it.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In Derbyshire, we already have a mayor in place. We have a two-tier authority. Can my honourable friend be clear that under these circumstances, if we can't get agreement on the size of the unitary authority, would an authority like Derbyshire still be having elections next May? And would there be any opportunity, how would he end up breaking this impasse if we have those at county wanting one Derbyshire and those on the districts probably wanting 2 or 3?
Minister.
So I should be clear that the assumption is that elections in counties are taking place as planned, with the exception of those areas who actively come to us to say that they want reorganisation discussions and they have a proposal that they can work up. In that case, we will take the view that elections to an authority that won't exist need to be postponed, enable to allow an election to follow for a shadow authority then that would follow for that. On Derbyshire, we need to be careful here. So the government's role is to invite and to receive. It's not our job to draw all the maps that then follow. It's for local areas to do that. And my role in particular is obviously quasi-judicial. I will need to take a view on potentially competing proposals. And so on that basis, I can't comment on the individual counties on what they may or may not look like.
Lee Dillon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Councils are clearly on their knees, and I welcome multi-year funding settlements and changes to the grant programme. But can you confirm, can the Minister confirm that councils' budgets won't have a penny spent on devolution and the government will support it so they can focus on their frontline services? And in the Minister's statement, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister said that councils could take their time to decide on the course they wish to follow, but in the next paragraph it goes on to say, but they will legislate to create where the government feel necessary. How does the Minister square those two sentences?
Minister.
Can I thank him for his question? Well, that's about partnership, it's about tone, and it's about how we work together. Now, our expectation is, because there's been quite a lot of talk in the sector about reorganisation and devolution, there has been, even before the White Paper, a number of areas that have come to government and say we want a conversation about local government reorganisation and or devolution. And so what we've had to do as a government is to say, well, we can't have 100 hairs running all over the place without a plan, a timescale that's transparent, that can be understood, and people can make a judgment about whether it's right for their area or not. And so what we will have is a proposal to double run, essentially, a devolution priority programme alongside a local government reorganisation. There'll be key points where those two pieces of work have to come together for joint decision making. But at least by that way, every area knows where it's up to and it can make a choice about whether they are at the right point in the process to opt into that or whether they need to take more time. The point about the backstop is really important. As I say, there is no map that we are looking to impose anywhere. But let's just say within a region, we have an agreement to compile every county bar one, and we get to the end of the Parliament, then I think it is legitimate to say, well, there's nowhere else to go. It's fairly self-explanatory that you're going to have a foundational strategic authority in that area. And that's the type of process that we're looking at. We are not looking at redrawing the map of England that imposes this in one swoop. This is about partnership, it's about working with local areas, and so far those conversations have been very fruitful.
Andy McNair.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I usually welcome this white paper. For us that have been in the front line trying to deliver services to our residents in the dysfunctional two-tier system that exists in Lancashire today, this is a breath of fresh air and exactly what we've been asking for years. So would the Minister agree with me, and now is the time for Lancashire leaders to put aside short-term personal and political considerations, not wait for the bill to be published, and work with urgency to bring forward proposals for new local government structures that are focused on the needs of residents and which can ultimately bring the highest level of devolution to Lancashire?
Minister.
Well, I absolutely understand that there are local tensions in Lancashire. I would say, though, to put it mildly, I would say, though, that my experience of council leaders across all parties, at county, at district or unitary level, has been positive, and even where there are differences, they are shared in a respectful way. And I wouldn't underestimate the progress of the Level 2 agreement that we have in Lancashire, that will see a devolution of skills powers, the CPO powers and others, as a first step to devolution. Now, within that agreement, there was a commitment that by autumn next year, a proposal for a mayoral combined authority would be submitted to government, and that may be with or without local government reorganisation. We have now been very clear about our direction on local government reorganisation, and our expectation is that Lancashire and other places have heard that direction and will act accordingly. And in the end, times change. You know, my son's primary school in Oldham had the Lancashire Education Committee plaque on it. In County Hall in Lancashire, there is the Oldham plaque. But times change, boundaries change, but people and communities don't. And the government that represents them has to be fit for purpose.
James Cleverly.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If devolution means anything, it means giving local leaders the right to do things differently. So if, for example, a future mayor of Essex wants to compete with London with a less heavily regulated or a less heavily taxed business environment, would that individual have the power to do so under the proposals put forward by the government?
Minister.
I mean, it's in the eye of the beholder. If he wants to turn Essex into Monaco, I bet that's not going to happen. But if what he's asking for is genuine freedoms and flexibilities, so that local leaders can make the right decisions to attract investment, to assemble sites, to invest in infrastructure, to remove barriers to planning and infrastructure, then that is absolutely where we're going to. We're very clear on the issue of tax and fiscal devolution. We are very clear that the white paper represents a moment in time. It's very much the start, it's not the end. And what should be read in the paper is an ambition to provide certainty across government to make sure that the level of ambition is raised. And I think when he sees a schedule of devolution across programme, and importantly on the competences, which are very important in terms of economic development and regeneration, he will see there's lots of scope there.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I thank the Minister for his statement today. I welcome the prospect of further devolution of powers over transport and housing and other important economic matters. And I would like to ask the Minister whether he could outline some of the greater scope for using those powers. So, for example, in Berkshire, we would like to see a Western Rail link to Heathrow, which would dramatically improve connectivity between Reading and Slough and Heathrow airports. There are many other strategic projects which have been held up, unfortunately, such as the third bridge for Reading. Would you like to comment on the potential benefits of the devolution on these issues?
Minister.
The honourable member makes a good point. When I said that this is less about structures and politicians and more about outcomes, there is actually the examples that we need to be looking towards. You know, the real test for many people is if I'm standing on a miserable Monday at the bus stop when it's raining, does the bus turn up or not? And actually just having more control over local bus services through franchising or even public ownership is part of the offer that's on the table. But buses alone don't fix the transport system. We need rail devolution alongside it. And so the white paper points to a very ambitious schedule of devolution when it comes to rail, very ambitious devolution when it comes to multimodal, and in particular single ticketing. Because in the end, even if you had coordination of transport, it needs to be affordable for people, and different modes of transport need to be linked when it comes to single ticketing as well. So the opportunities are definitely there on the transport agenda.
Tim Farron.
The Minister will know that in Cumbria we are still going through the process of a reorganisation that happened just 18 months ago, and all reorganisations, for better or for worse, are massively distracting and take people's eye off the ball. Would he therefore understand why residents and businesses and everybody else in both parts of Cumbria and the new authorities that we have there now are outraged at the thought that there might be an imposition of a mayoral model upon us? Isn't that the opposite of devolution? Isn't it right the local community should be able to have the the devolution that we want, and we're up for all the devolution the Minister will give us. We just don't see why we should have to have a top-down mayoral model and be told we have to have a reorganisation again 5 minutes after the last one.
Minister.
Well, I think the point in Cumbria, and by the way, I pay tribute to the leaders in Cumbria for the engagement that we've had, recognising that they have just been through local government reorganisation. There has been a lot to settle in that area. They have embraced the conversations that we've had, I think, with great maturity, and they have been fruitful. But we do recognise that different places are at different points, and different places have different pressures that they need to reconcile, which is why we're looking at a priority programme for the areas that are ready to go soon, and that will be very soon, to get the legislation in place, to have the consultation in place, and to make the case to the public. But for those areas that need longer, of course, we accept in some areas. But I might just say, in terms of the Mayor, I've been here long enough to see a number of members stand up and protest against the Mayor, only to pop up a bit later on and be the candidate for that same position. So I'll say to people in Cumbria, be careful what you wish for.
Before I call the next question, can I just remind members we've got around 40 minutes and we've got around 40 members, so please keep answers and questions succinct. Purun Moon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the move to devolve to every corner of the United Kingdom. But I'd like to ask the Minister, in relation to the upcoming Cornish devolution discussions, what is the Minister's vision of how the government will put into practice the legal obligations to protect and support Cornish national minority status in the same way that minority status is protected with our Celtic cousins in Wales and Scotland?
Minister.
Thank you, and thank you to members in Cornwall and also for leaders in Cornwall as well for a number of discussions that we've had. I know that devolution is an issue that is strongly felt. I know that identity in particular is an issue that is strongly felt, and we do recognise that we need to strike the right balance, and so the paper will point to a population size that is optimal in our view in terms of economic footprint, in terms of public service alignment, in terms of reconciling public service delivery boundaries. But we recognise in Cornwall, as in Cumbria, that we might have to take a more nuanced approach to reflect some of that. But I'll be clear as well that our view is to have established powers, which are integrated settlements, devolve powers of significance. That will come with a mayor. But of course, Cornwall has agreed to a level 2 deal, and in the current white paper, that would be a foundation deal as a starter for that journey.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And whatever your views on the different flavours of local government, surely we can all agree in this House that good local services are delivered when there are excellent, hard-working local councillors who have been democratically elected. And one of the things that is happening across this country in counties up and down the land at the moment is that county councillors are campaigning for re-election for 4-year terms next May. And this is an important decision for local people to make. It should be something that is part of those discussions in the election campaign next year. So can he take this opportunity to rule out any suggestion that he is cancelling any county council elections next year?
Minister.
Well, I mean, I tried to, well, in all things, I tried to be direct. And I have been direct that for those councils that come to the government with a request for reorganisation, if they meet the test and they have a credible programme in place, the elections will not likely take place the year after because they will be postponed to elect to a shadow authority for the authority that would replace the county and the districts. And so we're as clear as that. What there won't be, to give assurance, is the mass cancelling of elections for the sake of it and the hope and prayer that some councils may well come forward for reorganisation. It's got to be a balanced approach, it's got to be proportionate, and that's what we intend to do.
Gareth Snell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Stoke-on-Trent is already a unitary authority, but surrounded on either side by a two-tiered district system of Newcastle and Staffordshire Moorlands, who are our friendly neighbours, proud communities, but fundamentally different places. So can the Minister set out what will happen to existing unitary authorities? Can he also say how, as part of this review, he will protect the identities of communities who look to a place rather than to a compass point and a county name? And if we're going to have new mayors with new powers, can he set out what the corresponding reduction of ministers in this place will be to reflect the reduced number of services we provide?
Minister.
Well, in terms of Will we or won't we reduce the number of ministers? I can easily answer that and say that's well above my pay grade. But I hope there'll always be a need for a local government minister to oversee and to hold a hand and to be a well-wisher. In terms of the identity question, which is really important, any devolution or reorganisation has to get the balance, and the tests are applied in the white paper, and that's about getting the balance of the economic footprint, which is the real economy, to make sure that that footprint is recognised, public service boundary alignment, and making sure that as much as possible we align to public services across police and the health service and others, but also identity, to make sure that we capture that as much as possible. There will be trade-offs in some cases, but that is for local areas to come forward with the right proposal for their area after due consideration.
Leila Moran.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 42 of the councils across the country that have increased social homes. Of those four lie in Oxfordshire. South Oxfordshire District Council has doubled the number of social homes it's delivered over the last 10 years. Meanwhile, Oxford City next door has halved it. So there are districts doing incredible work. Why should they face finding themselves lumped in with other underperforming councils? And surely, rather than having a distracting reorganisation, proper devolution to those councils doing well is the way to deliver for local people.
Minister.
There is nothing in the white paper that is about decrying the work that has gone before. In fact, there's a great deal of celebration of the work that local government, and in particular councillors in leadership roles, whether that's about community leadership as frontline councillors or council leaders and their executive, have provided on a range of issues. They are the builders of devolution. And so this is not about something being done to them from the top. This is about local areas who will come together and make the request to government for either local government reorganisation and or for devolution. And as a government, we will work as partners in that development. But we fully appreciate there are district councils across England that are doing a very good job at delivering good public services. But in the end, there also has to be an acceptance that that is not the most efficient way of delivering public services. There are other ways.
Chris Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Minister for the ambition shown in his statement today, particularly on how we can get local authorities to be supporting the building of 1.5 million homes that we know that this country needs. Before the publication of the White Paper, the Department saw expression of interest from various areas. However, some of those initial submissions may no longer reflect the scale of ambition or the devolution options we now know are available. So can the Minister reassure me that authorities with greater ambition, who are ready to act swiftly in line with the powers and vision outlined in the White Paper, will be given the opportunity to revise their proposals and fast-track a mayoral model on geographies better suited to delivering results for their residents?
Minister.
So there was three kind of programmes that came on the transition to the new government. The first one was the kind of legacy devolution agreements that were agreed under the previous government but hadn't yet passed through Parliament that we wanted to reconcile. The second one were the areas that we wanted to target, that by and large were the areas in the north of England, to complete the map of the north and to populate that area. The third one was a write around from the Deputy Prime Minister to get a real sense of where different areas might be up to in terms of their approach to partnership, to the type of scale, to the type of geography. And so we saw the expression of interest process very much about a temperature check. And so the proposals that will come forward certainly aren't binding either on local areas or on the government, and we do expect that further proposals, including the same areas, will come forward.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What sort of guarantee can the Minister give that there will be new money from the Treasury to fund the costs of any local government reorganisation in Essex, to avoid the costs of that reorganisation resulting in cuts to public services or increased council taxes?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I apologise, it was raised earlier on, actually I didn't address it. The government will provide capacity to enable both devolution and also local government reorganisation through discussions with local authorities. Now, some of that might be funding, quite a lot of it might be support in terms of workforce development. So last week we launched the Workforce Development Group, which is a joint project between MHCLG, other government departments and also bodies like the LGA, to make sure that we're actually addressing the workforce issues, because even before reorganisation we do know that in many counties they're struggling to recruit to jobs like adult social care, in many districts they're struggling to recruit to jobs like planning and issues like that. So there's a bigger issue here that we're looking to address.
Dave Robertson.
Speaker, can I draw the House's attention to my register of interest, which lists me as a member of Lichfield City and District Council.
and it is the future of parish and town councils that I want to touch on, if I may. The paper talks in 2 places about stronger engagement between the new authorities and parish councils, but can the Minister go further than that and say how that's going to work? And particularly given their importance in places like Staffordshire, which is almost 1 million people, is 3% of the length of England, and has real senses of community and a lot of population centres which aren't currently reflected in their districts but are very much reflected in their town councils in places like Burwood.
Minister.
So again, we talk in the white paper, but I also referenced in my opening remarks that it was the Labour government that introduced quality parish status, where we recognise that that tier of government has a very important role to play and actually can do far more if trusted and given the power. So we do see that town and parish councils have an important role to play, but in the end, that is notwithstanding reorganisation. In many places, reorganisation would need to take place, and parish and town councils could or couldn't do more, but that's, I would say, a slightly separate issue. As to proposals for individual areas to take into account issues like identity and belonging and the different units of government, we're happy to have those on a one-to-one basis, and I can assure the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there will be ample opportunity on a one-to-one basis to meet with me and fellow ministers, and also for drop-in sessions as well, to make sure that matters that aren't picked up on the floor can be picked up later.
Manuela Pertegala.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I refer the House to my register of interest as a district councillor. Real devolution means empowering local communities, not centralising power into regional super-unitaries. Residents in my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon will be best represented by a South Warwickshire Unitary Council rather than a remote Warwickshire-wide unitary which will have 5 different local plans. Does the Minister agree that 500,000 minimum population is a top-down target that risks dividing existing communities and forcing together communities with no shared identity?
I think that's a fair point, but I'll be honest and say I'm losing track of the number of MPs that are standing up to declare that they're councillors still. Now, I recognise there's a transition, and I went through that transition myself, and there was an overlap in terms of being a councillor and being a member of Parliament. But in terms of the details about individual counties, again, it's for local areas to make the submission to government, and it's for government to assess the proposals that come forward. But I can say the government does not have a plan on a map for that county, but we do expect that the county and the districts will get together and work out a proposal that they can accept to submit to government that we can review.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Cornwall will welcome further devolution. We're a long way from London, but I wanted to continue the question about town councils, because in a place like Cornwall, where cuts to the unitary have meant town councils already taking on a lot of responsibility, how does the Minister see those town councils continuing in the future?
Minister.
Well, of course, that's precisely why when Labour was last in government and we brought forward that landmark legislation to create the Mayor of London and Parliaments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland and the assemblies, that parish and town councils were given that quality parish status. It's why local government was given the powers of wellbeing and other matters, because the previous Labour government recognised, as this government recognises, which is if you're going to have devolution, it's got to be top to bottom and it's got to get the right powers to the right places. And we do see an absolutely critical role at a neighbourhood level of town and parish councils playing a role in this, and we look forward to further discussions with the sector.
Simon Hall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is much to commend itself in the White Paper, and the Minister, I think, broadly is to be congratulated, but he knows as well as I do, as welcome as the multi-year settlement announcement is, that it's predicated on an outdated and effectively broken funding system. I understand the Treasury is not keen to revisit that in any meaningful way, but could I urge him still to consider a rural proofing mechanism to the funding formula to ensure that the additional costs of delivering local services in rural areas is recognised? And change is scary. I don't recognise the picture painted by the Honourable Lady for Mid-Dorset and North Pool. In Dorset, where we went unitary, no sane person would ever want to go back to a two-tier system. But we benefited from the excellent skills of Paul Rousel, much missed, died earlier this year. Can the Minister ensure that there are expert teams within his department to work alongside those councils which wish to make this important change, which will deliver savings and better services to local people?
Minister.
Can I thank my predecessor, in fact, for the question and also the tone in which he dealt with us in opposition, and I honour that in return. The fair funding review is absolutely critical. We've committed to the multi-year financial settlement. That's about giving security, but we all know that there is no security if the money isn't sufficient to meet the demand. And so he and the House have had absolute assurance that all the cost factors, including the cost of rural service delivery, will be taken into account in a fair funding review.
Leo Alaba.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In cities such as Southend, East and Rochford, in comparable countries, a city like Southend would generate £55 billion more across the country. Can the Minister please explain what powers will the English Devolution Bill give to mayors so that they can drive local growth and fulfil their financial potential?
Well, I mean, kind of in there is a project, really. I remember in 2014 when the Greater Manchester Devolution deal was signed, the principles about that was, one, to reform public services so that we focus on prevention rather than crisis management that's more expensive with worse outcomes, but also that we grow the local tax base because the area becomes more productive through that investment. I'll be honest and say we didn't see the investment in prevention reform, and I think that growth was stunted. But even in that context, growth in Greater Manchester has outperformed other areas, and I think that is in large part due to the devolution agreement that is in place where that leadership and coordination has been imposed. But you know, even by independent assessments, if we allow our regions to realise their full potential, it would be worth 30 to 50 billion pound of economy value that isn't being realised at the moment. So there is an alternative and we have to grasp it.
James McMurdoch.
Yesterday, a former Labour deputy leader referenced my party as a threat to democracy. Now, I'm sure that was a cute turn of phrase for television, but given the framework you've laid out for elections next year to be gained so easily, isn't the real threat here potentially the Labour Party?
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't characterise the party opposite as a threat to democracy, but I think there might be a threat to sanity. I think we are all tested on a too regular basis by, I would say, fairly ridiculous statements that try to wedge and divide instead of coming together. And there's one thing about devolution, which is regardless of party politics, what we have seen in local areas across Labour, the Democrats and the Conservatives is that when it comes to the people and the place and putting communities first, party politics are put to one side. And I extend that invitation to the Reform Party too.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's instructive to hear a former local government minister on the benches opposite describe the current system as broken, which is probably why we need this white paper. And residents in my constituency of Dartford have grown weary and frustrated at non-delivery by various tiers of local government in Kent, particularly when it comes to failures to provide SEND support for pupils, as well as poor bus services compared to the neighbouring ones in London. What hope for better delivery across all services, schools, social care, health, transport, roads, might we have from the current white paper?
Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's been very difficult for the government to have an honest conversation with local government previously about what an adequate level of public service provision should be in a given place, because it knew full well it wasn't providing the resources to enable that to happen in a fair way across the country. When we fix the financial foundations of local government through the fair funding review and the multi-year settlement, and we build the rigour around it, we will move away from the top-down hundreds and in some cases thousands of reporting metrics that we expect councils to report to from central government. We will look to simplify the funding system, to end unnecessary ring fences, act as shackles on local government. But in return for that, there has got to be governance, there's got to be accountability, and there's got to be a very clear responsibility to deliver the outcomes that the government want in return for that freedoms, flexibility and fair funding.
Clive Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents will be waiting to see how the Department's plans for local government reorganisation affects Woking and Borough Council. They will want to ensure that their voices are listened to. If we are to be shuffled around, merged, abolished by Whitehall. Importantly, they will want to know if the government plans will hit their wallets. Therefore, can the Minister commit to ensuring that the funding for any changes will come from his department and does not come from council tax, which should instead be used to fund vital local services?
Minister.
It's only this week that we are seeing a genuine redistribution of money in the local government system so that money goes to areas that need it most. Because for far too long, deprivation has been taken out of the funding formula. Recognition that some tax bases are weaker at a local level than others were taken away from the funding formula. And so the recovery grant, £600 million, is intended to get to those areas. And in terms of value for money for public services and getting those down to a neighbourhood level, as I said before, there is a two-tier premium that is paid for both by local taxpayers to the tune of around £2 billion that can be better used for local public services, and by central government through the floor protections that we give to district councils that frankly could be better used in areas of high deprivation and need in other ways.
Alice MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I hope that Norfolk will be part of the devolution priority programme so we can unlock the powers and fundings that we need on areas from transport to housing. But can I ask the Minister specifically about the role of key cities? Because Norwich is a key national, regional economic power, but it needs devolution to fully unlock its potential. It's vital that they have a key role and a voice in this process, both devolution and reorganisation. Can he assure us that will be the case and set out the process for cities in particular to do that? Thank you.
Minister.
Yeah. Obviously, both Norfolk and Suffolk were two counties that we had inherited from the previous government. I'll be clear that we could not progress with that deal because it would have saw directly elected council leaders take on the assumed role of a mayor, but without the framework in place to support it. So we didn't support that. But we have been working constructively with both counties to look at a mayoral combined authority over a bigger footprint, and we do hope that they come forward as part of the project programme. Now, that's a matter for them, and they may decide that now is not the right time, but I think there is huge potential. On the matter of reorganisation and devolution, and both Norwich and I would say Ipswich as well, it is very important, in my view, that when we look at reorganisation, there is a very strong anchor that holds that in terms of place and economy. And of course, in this case, Norwich will be central to that.
Sir Desmond Swain.
What say will voters in the New Forest have if there are proposals to remove either their district or their county council?
So the process of local reorganisation is a statutory process, so it requires local areas to produce plans, as with devolution, I should say, as well. And both of those are required to go to public consultation to solicit views. That's part of the process. When the formal process starts, the government's role then is to assess the proposals and the consultation as it's submitted, and then we don't take a view on geography and form up until we make the final decision.
Andrew Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The biggest issues holding back economic growth in mid-Cheshire are long-term underinvestment in our transport infrastructure and the lack of a joined-up skills agenda working with businesses across local authority borders. Now, this is not a unique issue to my constituency. The reality is that in 2010, East Germany's economy overtook Northern England's, and that trend has accelerated over the last 14 years. What new powers will the English Devolution Bill give strategic authorities to drive improvements in local transport and take control of their sub-region skills agenda?
Minister.
Well, I mean, this is one of the reasons why we were so keen to complete the map of the north of England, which is most would accept that, certainly for strategic transport, that those cross county boundaries. And so if we think about connectivity in the north of England, how Lancashire, Greater Manchester, the Liverpool City region, Cheshire, Cumbria, and the rest are joined up, and then even into Yorkshire, requires coordination. And what we want to see are mayors and strategic authorities working together across that pan-region so that even more powers can be devolved to address the type of issues that he talks about.
Ben Ox-Objective.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. According to the White Paper, a constituency like mine at Huntingdon will see Cambridgeshire County Council and Huntingdonshire District Council merge into a unitary council as a principal authority under Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority as a strategic authority. My question is that how will unitary councillors fulfil the roles of both multiple district and county councillors in a part-time capacity? And what does this also mean for the forthcoming Combined Authority mayoral election in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough?
Minister.
So the forthcoming election for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough will go ahead as planned. There is no proposal to change the boundary of the what is currently a combined authority that will move to a strategic authority. Local government, I should say, reorganisation, where there is an existing mayoral combined authority, providing it is coterminous in terms of the review that's undertaken, doesn't have an impact at all. All that happens is that the membership of the combined authority would change to reflect the new council structures as they appear.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a former councillor of 10 years who sought election to this place to give power back to communities, I'm absolutely thrilled by this devolution white paper, and I congratulate the Minister for bringing it forward. Two things. On page 16, there's an ambition to make the Mayor the Chair of the Integrated Care Partnership and also Police and Crime Commissioner, just as in South Yorkshire, and I commend that, and I'd like to hear a bit more about it. On page 94, there's a proposal for a right to buy community assets. Hengistbury Head Outdoor Centre in my constituency has just found out it's about to be a community benefit society with a lease for 99 years, but it's taken far too long to get to this place. I'd like to invite the Minister to come to Hengistbury Head Outdoor Centre. It may involve getting in a kayak, to find out more about what this right to buy could involve on the ground level, and I'd love to know a little bit more about what the government's intent will be.
Minister.
Thank you. Well, I know there are many Labour and cooperative members of Parliament that have really been campaigning very hard on the extended community right to buy, and that's about giving communities the power to take over those important community assets on their high street and in town centres in a way that is meaningful. And so the member for local growth, the Minister for local growth I should say, is working very hard now on a communities white paper that will follow, that will put far more detail on this, because it's not just about, in the end, that community right to buy, it's about a genuine shift where people feel far more control, power and agency in the places where they live.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, ma'am. Trying to create multiple unitary authorities in Essex won't work. It won't have public support. It'll take the best part of a parliament to implement. It won't save money. In fact, quite the opposite. There's a risk local government will grind to a halt in the meantime. As for mayors, in 23 years of canvassing in my constituency, I have never once had a constituent say to me on a doorstep, "I want a mayor of Essex." Indeed, looking up the road to London, can I tell the Minister, the last thing on earth we want in Essex is another Sadiq Khan.
Minister.
So I'll put him down as undecided.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister's ambitious announcement that has been made today and the opportunity devolution could bring to the people of Pompey. And I'd like to thank the Minister and his team for the time that they have given to MPs in this House and his offer of an open door. Madam Deputy Speaker, Portsmouth is one of those densely populated parts of the country, and alongside a commitment to the desperate and urgent need for affordable housing, will the Minister commit to using the English Devolution Bill to empower my communities with the right to buy beloved community assets such as empty shops, pubs and much-needed community spaces to ensure that cities like mine and the people in them feel a real pride and ownership once again?
Minister.
And I think that's the point, really, that when we talk about important community assets, of course we see them from an economic point of view, that are far better to be used and be productive. But in the end, we also recognise that they're hugely important in terms of community identity and community pride. And I would say in a lot of working class areas, including Oldham, Chadderton, Royton, where I represent, it is the local civic building, it's the local pub, it's the local church, where they aren't just buildings, they are part of people's story, and people really care about them.
Caroline Burden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A top-down reorganisation of a failing council like Conservative-run Devon County Council is a bit like shuffling the deck chairs on a sinking ship. But we know that chronic underfunding for years has made it impossible for councils to fulfil their obligations, so I do welcome the multi-year funding settlement. However, creating larger regional authorities is not devolving power, it's removing power and responsibility away from local communities and shifting it to a distant, higher-tier authority that, in a place like Devon, will feel remote to towns and parishes. And we must have the opportunity to pass our verdict in May on Conservative-run Devon County Council, which has been failing our most vulnerable children for over a decade. So can the Minister reassure me that these elections will go ahead as planned in 2025? Minister.
Well, I think it would be rude to deny the good people of Devon a good spat between the Conservatives and the Lib Democrats. But in all seriousness, it's for local areas to decide whether they want to apply to government to be part of the reorganisation programme or not. If we receive a request from that area as any other, then we will receive it and administer it in a fair way.
Steve Race.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to welcome the huge opportunity that's present in this white paper, especially for cities like Exeter, which is also held back by Tory Devon County Council at the Upper Tier Authority. Can the Minister confirm that devolution and reorganisation running hand in hand can help key economic growth cities like Exeter to retain, enhance, expand its historic self-governance, working as part of a strategic authority as an equal partner to unleash its economic potential?
Minister.
Absolutely. I think one of the problems that was keenly felt with the previous devolution framework is that it didn't quite give enough regard to the role of district councils, who were the primary city, the university city, the travel to work area, the economic hub. And what reorganisation does give is the ability for those places to grow, to become unitaries, and to take their place on the new strategic authorities.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 15 years ago, just before I joined this House, we had the reorganisation of Wiltshire Council into Wiltshire Unitary and the abolition of several district councils. We now have another reform, it seems, and the heart of Wessex is the probable outcome for Somerset, Dorset and Wiltshire. What reassurance could the Minister offer the people of Salisbury, who still have some difficulty accommodating the abolition of Salisbury District Council? Can he assure them that these proposed changes will be positive in terms of the combination of resources for strategic investment on transport and other services like that?
Minister.
I think through any local government reorganisation, there's always a fine balance, I think, between trying to create a cohesive new, but respecting the very strongly felt local identities that people feel that are very unique. And I think when it's done right, the council can be confident in its own standing because it knows it's delivering outstanding services. I would say when it's done wrong, it's tried to impose an identity on a place because of the form of the council that doesn't reflect local identity. And I would say for those of us in towns like Oldham that went through 1974 reorganisation, that is as keenly felt as other areas. But that is not about the type of government. That is about culture and approach, and when done well, it can work.
Adam Jurgo.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to pay tribute to all the district councillors in the loyal and ancient borough of Newcastle-under-Lyme, including the Tories who tried and failed to defeat me, but I'll be nice to them, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, on page 10 of the White Paper, the Minister notes, and I quote, "We must end top-down micro-managing." I agree, and notwithstanding how much of this announcement was trailed in the press and social media in recent days, can I press him on the point raised by my neighbour in Stoke-on-Trent Central? The Minister says there will be trade-offs when it comes to local identities. Who will decide ultimately on those trade-offs? And when will people in the real world be able to have their say on these proposals?
Minister.
Well, I mean, I would say that in the real world had their say at the ballot box, because devolution and taking power out of this place was a manifesto commitment that we are absolutely clear-eyed to deliver, and the White Paper is about delivering that manifesto commitment. In terms of process and consultation, one is for local areas to determine what proposal they would submit to government. Government has not got a proposal that we're submitting to local areas. And secondly, it would be ideal, wouldn't it, if local areas could get around a single proposal so that government's only role is to receive it and say thank you very much, rather than choosing between alternative proposals being put forward from the same area.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for the time he made available to me at one of his surgery appointments recently, and welcome the announcement of something that we discussed then about the ending of bidding for discrete funding pots that was a trademark of the last Conservative government. I'd just like to ask how these announcements are not going to impinge on the announcements his department made last week. My honourable friend, the member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale, eloquently set out the challenges of reorganisation in Cumbria. How are we going to make sure that those housing targets are able to be delivered during this period of uncertainty?
Minister.
We are very mindful that there's a lot of change in the system quite early on. That is quite deliberate. We believe strongly that when the general election next comes, the judgment that people will make is whether they feel better in their own financial security, they've got money in their pocket, they feel like they're getting on in life, and they feel secure in the place where they live, and local public services are part of that. And so it's been a very deliberate decision through the White Paper and other measures to deal with the structural changes that are needed early on in the Parliament so that we can get those out of the way and people can really see the benefit towards the end.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I should declare an interest as a member of Rugby Borough Council. Madam Deputy Speaker, page 16 of the White Paper speaks about reforming and joining up public services and about over the long term the government's ambition of aligning public service boundaries. In this regard, could my honourable friend expand on how these reforms can enhance the ability of people, through their elected representatives, to hold public service leaders to account and exercise greater democratic control over such services?
Minister.
So we talk quite a lot around how there just wasn't sufficient funding in the system provided over a decade long of underfunding. But that doesn't mean there wasn't growing cost in the system. And what we have found is because local government in the end are the place where all the demand presents to, whether it likes it or not, when there's failure in other parts of the system, whether that's a failure of developers to build enough properties, whether it's about the NHS not able to quite coordinate with community services, or whether it's about the private sector, say in children's services, essentially exploiting the audience that it has and providing very eye-watering sums. In the end, we have got to redesign local public services around people, around place and communities. And public sector reform and prevention is part of that. The alignment of public service boundaries are critical. If you don't have that democratic control and oversight over things like the ICBs or the Police and Crime Commission that's aligned to these strategic authorities, we will not make the progress that we need to make.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I welcome the intention to reorganise local government that the government has set out. Clearly this is something that has been in play for a while. But he'll know that the independent and sovereign Kingdom of Kent has had an identity of its own for about 2,000 years. Now, the exact borders within that identity are something open to some debate, even today, quite extraordinarily, but they are. Will he please tell us what are the priorities that he's going to use in order to prioritise the devolution priority plan? Is he going to be championing the size, the 500,000 plus? Is he going to be championing the transport infrastructure? Is he going to be championing the historic affiliations? How is he going to understand this and how is he going to prioritise for that priority plan?
Minister.
Well, I think he outlined exactly the balance that we're trying to get, really. One is about size for efficiency through both devolution strategic authorities and through local reorganisation, if that follows in the same area. Two, the real economy that's functioning, because in the end it's about growth and making sure that a functioning economy can be identified and can grow. But then, of course, mixed in with identity to make sure that that works. And it goes, I think, in most places, that the historic counties are the building blocks for that. But I know some boundaries, as we've seen in Cumbria, are quite hotly contested. But we're not going back 2,000 years.
Noah Law.
Madam Deputy Speaker, parts of Britain such as Cornwall, which have national minority status, have been working towards devolution for decades, if not centuries. So, given that the Minister has outlined a certain pace and ambition in this bill, will he work with Cornwall Council, ourselves and town and parish councils to ensure that that pace and ambition is delivered on and gets Cornwall its rightful place at the County of Nations and Regions in due course?
Minister.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a number of competing proposals, really. I don't believe in kind of elephants in the room. One of it was an explicit proposal to have a Devon and Cornwall combined authority with a mayor that was proposed, I would say, by and large from Devon. That was met with, I think, quite animated resistance, I would say, from Cornwall for different reasons. It is not our intention, and frankly, there aren't enough hours in the day to keep on getting involved in local disputes about boundaries and identity. What we want, and this is genuine, is for local area to self-organise, to come up with a proposal that's right for their area, and to make a proposal to government so that we can work in partnership and deliver the outcome of getting powers out of this place into places like Cornwall.
Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the elements of this white paper that are about devolution, but we have to recognise that some elements are about concentration. The Minister has talked about the two-tier premium, but the reality is that his proposals mean that a local tier in some places will be replaced by a more distant mayoral tier. Does the Minister recognise that this risks creating a bit of a democratic deficit? Surely we should be trying to keep the local in local government as much as possible. And given that average turnout in the last lot of mayoral elections in the last year was 30%, what will he do to address that risk of democratic deficit? And in particular, will he introduce a fair and proportional system for local elections?
Thank you. I mean, the truth is that these strategic authorities are about taking power from this place and giving it down to communities. Every minister gets hundreds of sign-offs every single day. But I can tell you the number of sign-offs where the minister and members across will remember this, have to sign off whether or not a cyclist should pass through a local park because the parish council has to apply to central government for permission, is part of the centralising nature of this state that we've got to change.
Luke Meyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the statement and the white paper today? Centralisation is part of the reason why we are one of the most regionally unequal advanced economies, as IPPR North has set out. But it's important that these strategic authorities are run well. And so can I ask what steps he will be taking to ensure they're funded fairly, and what assurances he can give that strategic authorities must demonstrate responsible stewardship of the public finances?
Well, that's why there is a proposal in the paper to regularise, if you like, the mayoral precept process. Now, where combined authorities exist and they don't apply a precept, it is not that mayors and combined authorities don't cost money. Of course they do. It's just that local authorities pay for it through a levy or a contribution outside of the precept. Our view is that for transparency and accountability and political accountability, that when mayors and combined authorities or strategic authorities are spending money, the public have a right to see that identified on their council tax and make a judgment about whether that money is being spent wisely or not.
Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Minister, the residents of Staffordshire Moorlands do not want to be subsumed into Stoke-on-Trent. So can he give a guarantee that they will not be forced into a devolution deal against their will, and that the decisions that matter to them will continue to be taken in the Moorlands and not in Stoke-on-Trent?
Minister.
Well, if I got myself into neighbourhood disputes, honestly, I want to do it for hours in the day. What I will say is that I hope through reading the white paper that this isn't seen as a forcing together. Genuinely, it is seen as a distribution of power from a centralising state to communities where it really matters. And so my hope is that local disputes, and some of which I'm sure are well rehearsed and go back quite a long time, are put to one side, because in the end, the prize, the greater good, is for the benefit of all.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Minister's recognition that unitary authorities deliver for residents? Bracknell Forest Council is an example of a unitary authority promoting a strong sense of space and delivering economic growth. And though it is small, it is mighty. Will my honourable friend agree to work with Bracknell Forest Council to develop a plan that works for Bracknell?
Minister.
Yeah, it's our absolute commitment that we will work in partnership and we will give capacity and time to make sure that those local nuances are reflected in whatever follows.
And the final question from the backbench is Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Minister is well aware, he's just concluded the Greater Lincolnshire devolution deal, which I welcome and support. But he will be aware that there are two unitary authorities in the north of the county and the rest is a two-tier system. Can you just clarify whether the government expect that two-tier area to actually come forward with proposals for unitaries? And could I remind him that if that is the case, the sparsity factor plays with Lincolnshire, and the 500,000 target is far too high. Prior to 1974, there were actually 3 county councils to cover the whole county.
Minister.
So, I mean, first of all, we don't have a proposal for Greater Lincolnshire in terms of reorganisation, but that's not to say that conversations aren't taking place locally about making a representation to government. So when that letter goes out later on today, we do expect that areas that currently are not on our list will come forward on that basis. In the end, it's a matter for local areas to determine what submission they want to make. But in terms of sparsity and having an anchor that makes sense, I completely understand the point he makes.
We now come to the next statement, and I'll give the front benches some time to swap over.
Don't pick him again.
Minister Justin Madders.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With your permission, I wish to make a statement on the ongoing takeover of Royal Mail Group's parent company, International Distribution Services plc. Royal Mail is an iconic national institution, and this government is committed to ensuring that it remains one. Since taking office in July, the Secretary of State and I have been clear that the government would robustly scrutinise the proposed takeover of Royal Mail and ensure there are safeguards for its future. Whilst the takeover bid is still ongoing and subject to the relevant regulatory processes, this statement is to update the House on the legally binding undertakings that have now been given to the Department for Business and Trade by the bidder, EP Group. I would like to be clear that this does not mark the conclusion of the takeover, and these undertakings will only become effective if the takeover goes through. However, should the takeover complete, I am pleased to announce that the Department for Business and Trade has secured significant commitments to promote a long-term and financially sustainable future for the Royal Mail in the United Kingdom. At the outset, it is helpful for me to set out where Royal Mail was at the time this takeover bid was announced. Before this bid, Royal Mail's financial position was challenging. In its financial year 2023-24, Royal Mail recorded a loss of £348 million. This loss was in due part due to a long-term decline in letters and the significant fixed costs of the Universal Service Delivery Network. At the same time, Royal Mail has not met its quality of service targets set by the independent regulator Ofcom. Royal Mail's performance for the 2023-24 financial year resulted in Ofcom fining it £10.5 million. And whilst the previous government were happy to accept decline, this government has worked closely with the buyer to secure significant commitments to deliver the transformation of Royal Mail into a sustainable service and hardwired in stronger protections for Royal Mail's identity. When the discussions with EP Group began, my department's objectives were to firstly strengthen the financial sustainability of this iconic and important British institution. Secondly, Madam Deputy Speaker, we wanted to protect the customers, workers and brand of Royal Mail. Today, I can confirm we have agreed a deed that customers and the workforce alike can welcome, with significant new commitments from the buyer to this government. This deed is a clear example of the government's commitment to working hand in hand with business to generate reform and investment in public service. It is also yet another example of this government fixing the foundations where the previous government did not. Firstly, I am proud to announce to the House that we have agreed that the government will have a golden share in Royal Mail. This golden share will ensure that the Department for Business and Trade now has an ability to prevent Royal Mail from moving its headquarters abroad or moving its tax residency, in either case without government permission. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I should make it clear this is an entirely new measure which was not in place at the time of Royal Mail's privatisation. And except in very limited circumstances, it will remain in place in perpetuity, including when there is a subsequent change in ownership of Royal Mail. I want to be clear that this will not give the government any role in the day-to-day running of the business. Royal Mail remains a private entity. But not only have we agreed a golden share, Madam Deputy Speaker, in addition to this golden share, there are a number of other commitments made by EP Group. I will set these out at a high level. These include a commitment to prevent value extraction unless two tests are satisfied. Firstly, a financial test that takes into account the debts of Royal Mail so that value cannot be extracted if the company is heavily indebted. Secondly, and recognising this is a key concern of the public, a quality test to ensure that value is not extracted unless specific performance targets are met. All businesses need to adapt and improve to respond to change, and Royal Mail is no different. Recognising that there is a need for Royal Mail to modernise, there is a commitment from EP Group to ensure that Royal Mail has the financial means to fund the transformation of its business in the 3-year period following completion of the acquisition. In addition, EP Group have agreed to take an immediate step to strengthen Royal Mail's balance sheet by removing a significant intragroup debt which is currently due to the remainder of the IDS Group. The agreed undertakings also include a commitment to ensure that Royal Mail retains ownership or access on fair terms to those assets necessary to meet the universal service obligation. Next, EP Group have agreed to meet all the regulatory requirements that our Royal Mail Group are subject to, including ensuring that it remains the universal service provider for as long as EP Group is in control. And we all know, not just in this House but across the UK, that the Royal Mail is an iconic British brand, and that is why there is a commitment to the existing brand protections in place for Royal Mail. Royal Mail is a respected and revered operator, not just in the UK, Madam Deputy Speaker. It has various international responsibilities at international fora and with the overseas territories. These will be respected and continued, maintaining the UK's prestigious international position. EP have stated their long-term commitment to Royal Mail, and these discussions have demonstrated the wide range of areas of public interest in the work of the company. So I'm also pleased to confirm that EP have committed to taking steps to facilitate discussions between any future owner of the business and this government, be that in 10 or 20 years' time. These commitments have been offered by EP Group to the department on a voluntary basis. Nothing has been offered in exchange. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank EP Group. I am confident that we share the same objective of a reliable and financially sustainable universal service provider where workers and consumers are placed at the heart of a sustainable Royal Mail. And I'm also pleased that, as well as reaching an agreement with the department, EP Group have today announced they have in principle negotiated agreements with both unions representing the Royal Mail workforce. The government welcomes these agreements, and I am confident that the constructive and collegiate approach between the unions and the buyer can represent a restart for industrial relations in the Royal Mail Group. I have set out some of the key commitments, but there are further commitments from EP Group which I do not have time to set out in full today. I am therefore placing copies of the deed in the libraries of both houses. I will, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, keep the House informed as much as I can as the takeover progresses. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I start by thanking the Minister for advance of his statement. But before I get into my questions, Madam Deputy Speaker, can we take a moment to thank every postman and postwoman up and down this country for their hard work, particularly at this time of year, when in all the challenging weathers, they're out there putting letters through every letterbox in the land, collecting thousands of letters from the pillar box red post boxes around every corner of our country, and getting, especially at this Christmas season, the opportunity today, on behalf of all of us, to say thank you. Because every colleague here will recognise the importance of Royal Mail, both as an institution and as a provider of a vital nationwide service. Because it's been in existence for over 500 years, and it's seen a lot of change over those 500 years. But the one consistent thing is that it's still a service on which we all depend every day. It's not the only way we communicate anymore, but it's a vital one, and one which will continue to be needed, including by government. But what a shame, Madam Deputy Speaker, that one of the biggest postal deliveries that was done by the Royal Mail this year was by government, and it was a letter to many, many pensioners, often on low incomes, cancelling their winter fuel payments. The dwindling number of letters sent has eroded the base on which the success of Royal Mail was built. The inevitable consequence of this is that Royal Mail has been facing serious financial challenges. And amid those challenges, the service received by people across Britain has become worse, whether it's through deliveries missing their deadlines, or letters going missing, or occasionally, in some areas, weeks at a time without post. And the example of that failure was shown up last week by the fines that Royal Mail received. And the cost of this poor service cannot be understated, because whether it's for those who subscribe for services by mail, or those who rely on business deliveries, or individuals who miss appointments with their general practitioner, both impacting their health and costing the government, the poor service cannot be allowed to continue. So the inward investment into the service announced today will be scrutinised not only by shareholders, but as it is the golden shareholder, my questions to the government are as follows. What guarantees has he received about the service provision? What commitments has he received about the level of jobs across Royal Mail? How much of Royal Mail do the employees themselves now own? And could he clarify, in some places it's been reported that the commitment to the tax residency guarantee is for 5 years, but I heard the Minister say at the dispatch box that it was perpetual. Could he clarify that? And what ongoing role will the government have in making sure that Ofcom is able to make sure Royal Mail delivers the service expected by customers, because the fines don't seem to be doing it? An important part of the service offered by Royal Mail is the universal service obligation. It now requires post to be delivered 6 days a week and parcels on 5. And when the Royal Mail is working well, the universal service obligation provides an outstanding service. However, they wish for it to be reformed. Does the Minister believe that the obligation must be maintained in its current form? Can he confirm what discussions he's held with EP Group about the obligation? And will the Minister confirm whether there is a sunset on the obligation? He mentioned potentially if there were a transfer of ownership. But the value of Royal Mail goes far beyond the universal service obligation. Can the Minister outline if he expects any of the other services provided by Royal Mail to be impacted? Can, for example, my rural constituents continue to count on their letters being collected from every post box? And what risks has he identified with the takeover itself? And then, although Post Office and Royal Mail are separate entities, they are two closely tied organisations. Just over a month ago, the government announced that over 100 post office branches were at risk of closure, with hundreds of jobs lost. Can the Minister explain what assessment he has made of the risks facing the post office and how they will be impacted by the sale of Royal Mail? Like all businesses, Royal Mail faces the same headwinds, Madam Deputy Speaker, often created by this government. Whether it's Labour's employment regulations or the National Insurance Jobs Tax, businesses have warned that they may be forced to put up prices and cut jobs because of the very actions of this government. So finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, can the Minister confirm whether Royal Mail has expressed concerns over the budget or over the Employment Rights Bill?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Shadow Minister for her comments, and can I start by joining her in thanking all those postal workers who throughout the year, not just at this time of year when it's particularly busy, but 12 months a year, rain or shine, sleet or snow, deliver those much needed communications from friends, family and loved ones. And I was pleased to be able to go to my own depot in Ellesmere Port last Friday. I'm going to another one in the constituency in New Ferry this Friday, and I think all members should be encouraged to do those visits, because it really does show how much we appreciate the work that our postmen and women do. And she's right to say that this is a service that we all depend upon, and I agree with her that performance hasn't been good enough in recent years, and that's been why we've had a number of discussions with the company itself and indeed with Ofcom about how we're going to get things back on track. And this is why this agreement is so important. This deal will get the investment in that is needed to try and drive up that performance. In terms of some of the specific questions that she asked, the guarantees in relation to service provision, of course, the legislative framework is already there for the universal service obligation. I see that not having any impact on this takeover. It's not been part of the discussions. It's an entirely separate issue, but Parliament will have its say on that if it's needed. We know there's going to be a consultation from Ofcom next year on the universal service obligation, and it is, I think it's recognised that there needs to be an awful lot of work done to bring the standards up to the level we would like to see. And of course, one of the protections in the agreement is hoping to deliver on that. In terms of guarantees on jobs, she will be aware, of course, that the General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union has spoke very positively about the agreement that's been reached. He believes there's been sufficient assurances given on jobs, but also in terms of actual employee engagement. She asked whether the employees will own the company. That is not the case, but they will have a say in governance in future as a result of an agreement between the Communication Workers Union and EP Group. That's to be ratified by the Communication Workers Union executive, but that will be a groundbreaking arrangement that we haven't had previously. And she asked about tax residency in perpetuity. That is what the Golden Share does indeed intend to deliver.
Chair of the Select Committee, Liam Byrne.
Thanks very much, Speaker. This is a very hard-working minister. I welcome the statement that he has made today. I take it from today's announcement that Mr Kretinsky has cleared the investment screening tests, which the Cabinet Office are responsible for. It would be useful just to have that confirmed. But let me press my honourable friend about the universal service obligation. Is it his intention, beyond the initial 5 years that he's talked about in the House today, that he will seek 6-day delivery and a universal service obligation in place for Royal Mail for as long as His Majesty's Government retains the golden share?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for his comments. In relation to the golden share, that's to deal with tax residency and headquarters being domiciled in the UK. Obviously, there will be discussions about the universal service obligation. We know that this is a fast-moving market, and of course, this will be for determination by Ofcom sometime next year.
Spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats, Sarah Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair. The Royal Mail has been plagued by issues for years, and my constituents do deserve better. A reliable postal service is essential for all of us, but particularly for rural businesses and those waiting for important NHS appointments. Naturally, in communities like those I represent in Wiltshire, there are some serious concerns about what today's state might mean for the quality of the rural services. Last Friday, I met with the brilliant posties in my constituency of Chippenham, who were rushed off their feet delivering Christmas cards, some of whom have been in the job for nearly 50 years. Spending time with them reminded me how important they are. They are often the first person to notice that someone hasn't been to their door in days. They are the unseen champions of our community, particularly in those rural communities where other people are not walking past. They reminded me that that reliable postal service is essential for our local communities. And so let me join the honourable members for thanking them for their dedication, specifically at this time of year. But businesses depend on timely deliveries, and many older residents rely on our postal services for both banking, utilities and keeping connected. Any weakening of this universal service obligation would disproportionately harm the rural areas of Wiltshire, where postal alternatives are very limited. Therefore, the Government and EP must give us a commitment that they will not water down the Royal Mail service at a public expense.